Some silences are louder than any sound. The Libby Dam stretches 422 feet across the Kootenai River in northwestern Montana, creating Lake Koocanusa behind its concrete face. Construction began in 1966 as part of the Columbia River Treaty, a massive engineering project designed to control flooding and generate hydroelectric power for the Pacific Northwest. The dam sits in a narrow canyon carved by glacial waters, surrounded by dense forests of Douglas fir and western larch that climb toward the Cabinet Mountains. For 7 years, this remote valley echoed with the constant rumble of diesel engines, hydraulic systems, and concrete mixers as workers carved into bedrock and poured foundation after foundation. The Kootenai River had flowed through this canyon for thousands of years before the first survey crews arrived. Local Ktunaxa tribes called the area a place where voices carried differently, though few records remain of their specific warnings. The construction site itself was isolated, accessible only by a narrow access road that wound through 30 miles of wilderness. Workers lived in temporary housing near the site, and the nearest town, Libby, lay 15 miles downstream. Radio communication was spotty due to the canyon walls, and supply trucks made the journey twice weekly when weather permitted. By 1972, the dam's concrete structure had reached nearly full height, and crews were installing the final turbine housings and electrical systems. The work required precise coordination between multiple teams operating cranes, concrete pumps, and heavy earth-moving equipment. It was during this phase that shift supervisor Thomas Brennan first noticed what he would later describe in his incident reports as an impossible mechanical failure that wasn't actually a failure. On Tuesday, October 10, 1972, at exactly 3:17 in the afternoon, every piece of heavy machinery on the construction site fell silent simultaneously. Diesel engines continued running, hydraulic fluid kept circulating, and electrical systems remained powered, but no sound emerged from any of the equipment. Workers could feel the vibrations through their boots and see exhaust continuing to rise from smokestacks, but the familiar industrial noise that had dominated the canyon for 6 years simply vanished. The silence lasted exactly 7 minutes. At 3:24 p.m., normal sound returned all at once, as if someone had unmuted the entire construction site. Radio traffic from that day, preserved in Army Corps of Engineers archives, captures the confusion in real time. Equipment operators reported their gauges showing normal function throughout the silent period, and no mechanical problems were discovered during subsequent inspections. Brennan documented the incident and reported it to his supervisors, expecting a simple explanation involving atmospheric conditions or acoustic phenomena. Instead, the same thing happened the following Tuesday at precisely the same time, and the Tuesday after that. By November, word had spread among the construction crews, and workers began gathering to witness what they started calling the Tuesday silence. Foreman Jack Williamson described the experience in a letter to his wife that surfaced decades later among donated papers to the Montana Historical Society. He wrote that the silence felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain, as if the canyon itself was holding its breath. He noted that birds stopped singing during those 7 minutes, and even the wind seemed to pause. Other workers reported similar observations about the complete absence of ambient sound, not just the cessation of mechanical noise. Dr. Patricia Chen, an acoustic engineer from the University of Washington, arrived on site in December 1972 to investigate the phenomenon. Her preliminary measurements confirmed that sound levels dropped to near zero during the Tuesday events, but her equipment detected continued mechanical vibrations that should have produced audible noise. She hypothesized that unique atmospheric conditions in the canyon might create a standing wave pattern that canceled specific frequencies. But her calculations couldn't account for the precision of the timing or the complete silence across all audible ranges. Chen's investigation was cut short when her funding was suddenly discontinued in January 1973. Her research notes, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request in 2004, show that she had begun recording unusual electromagnetic readings during the silent periods, but her equipment was removed from the site before she could complete her analysis. The official reason given was budget constraints related to the dam's approaching completion date. The Tuesday silences continued through the winter and spring of 1973. Army Corps of Engineers logs show increased security presence during this period, and several construction workers reported seeing unfamiliar personnel with measurement equipment in the canyon during non-working hours. When questioned, site management claimed these were safety inspectors conducting routine evaluations. Dale Morrison, who operated Crane Number 7 during the final construction phase, recalled the psychological effect of the silences in an interview conducted for a local history project in 1998. He described feeling isolated, even when surrounded by dozens of other workers, as if each person had been placed in a separate acoustic bubble. Some crew members began taking breaks during the 3:17 time slot, unwilling to experience the sensation of working in complete silence while machinery vibrated beneath their hands. The phenomenon attracted attention from several government agencies beyond the Army Corps of Engineers. Declassified documents from the Federal Aviation Administration show that aircraft flying over the canyon during Tuesday afternoon hours reported brief navigation system anomalies at precisely the times corresponding to the ground-level silences. The National Weather Service recorded unusual barometric pressure readings at a monitoring station 12 miles away, showing sharp spikes that aligned with the 7-minute silent periods. By June 1973, construction was nearing completion, and water levels behind the dam had begun to rise. The final Tuesday silence occurred on June 19th, exactly 1 week before the dam's first turbine came online. After that date, the phenomenon never returned. Workers who remained for the completion ceremony and initial power generation reported normal acoustic conditions throughout the canyon. The official Army Corps of Engineers report on Libby Dam construction, published in 1974, contains no mention of the Tuesday silences. Environmental impact studies conducted prior to construction had identified potential noise concerns for local wildlife, but made no reference to acoustic anomalies. When contacted for comment decades later, retired project manager Robert Sterling claimed no memory of unusual incidents during construction, despite multiple documented reports bearing his signature. Dr. Chen's research notes the only detailed scientific examination of the phenomenon disappeared from university archives sometime in the 1980s. Her former colleagues confirmed that she had presented preliminary findings to a closed conference on acoustic anomalies in 1974, but no record of her presentation exists. Chen herself moved to private industry and declined all subsequent interview requests before her death in 2007. The Libby Dam operates normally today, generating power for communities across the Pacific Northwest. The canyon that once fell silent every Tuesday is now filled with Lake Koocanusa, its waters reaching depths of 370 feet. Construction workers who experienced the silences have scattered across the country, and few speak publicly about what they witnessed. Those who do maintain that the phenomenon was real, documented, and deliberately obscured. Local residents occasionally report unusual acoustic properties near the dam, particularly during early morning hours, when mist rises from the lake's surface. Some describe brief moments when ambient sound seems muffled or distant, though nothing approaching the complete silence experienced during construction. The dam's visitor center makes no mention of the Tuesday phenomenon, and guided tours focus on hydroelectric generation and flood control benefits. The machinery that fell silent during those 7 minutes was eventually sold, scrapped, or transferred to other projects. No subsequent reports exist of similar acoustic anomalies at other construction sites using the same equipment. Whatever caused the Tuesday silences at Libby Dam appears to have been specific to that location during that particular time period, in a canyon that no longer exists above the waterline. Some voices transmit from places that don't exist on any map. Lewistown sits at the geographic center of Montana, surrounded by wheat fields and cattle ranches that stretch to horizons broken only by distant mountain ranges. The town was established in 1885 as a railroad stop, and by the 1960s it served as a regional hub for ranchers and farmers scattered across central Montana's vast emptiness. Radio station KXLO began broadcasting in 1958 from a modest studio on Main Street, offering local news, weather reports, and country music to listeners within a 50-mile radius. The station's call letters stood for nothing in particular, chosen simply because they were available from the Federal Communications Commission. The region around Lewistown is marked by geological oddities left behind by ancient glacial activity. The Judith Mountains rise to the northeast, while the Snowy Mountains form a barrier to the south. Between these ranges lie thousands of square miles of rolling prairie punctuated by coulees, dry creek beds, and isolated homesteads connected by gravel roads that sometimes lead nowhere. Local ranchers knew every section of land within driving distance, and surveyors had mapped the area thoroughly for mineral rights and agricultural purposes. Radio signals in this flat terrain carried far, especially at night when atmospheric conditions allowed broadcasts to reach into neighboring counties. KXLO operated with standard programming during its early years, but on Sunday, March 5, 1961, something changed in its overnight transmission. Station engineer Bill Thorson arrived for his Monday morning shift to find the transmitter logs showing normal operation, but several listeners had called to report an unusual broadcast the previous evening. According to these reports, the station had aired a woman's voice at exactly midnight, speaking nothing but geographic coordinates in a flat, emotionless tone. Thorson checked the station's program schedule and found no record of any midnight programming. KXLO signed off at 11 p.m. on Sundays and didn't resume broadcasting until 6 a.m. Monday. The transmitter should have been silent during the hours in question. When he examined the equipment, everything appeared normal, and the station's backup recording system showed only dead air during the reported time period. The strange broadcast returned the following Sunday at the same time. This time, ranch hand Carl Peterson was listening to his radio while checking cattle near the Judith Gap. He later told investigators that he heard a woman's voice clearly pronounce a series of numbers that he recognized as latitude and longitude coordinates. The voice spoke for approximately 3 minutes, repeating the same coordinates multiple times with mechanical precision, then fell silent. Peterson wrote down the coordinates and drove to the location the next day. Using a surveyor's map, he found the spot roughly 12 miles southwest of Lewistown, on public land that showed no signs of recent activity. The coordinates led him to an unremarkable patch of prairie grass, but when he probed the ground with a metal detector borrowed from a friend, he discovered something buried 18 inches below the surface. What Peterson found was a small brass disc, roughly the size of a silver dollar, engraved with the date April 15, 1987. The date was more than 25 years in the future. The disc showed no signs of weathering despite being buried in soil that appeared undisturbed. Peterson reported his discovery to the Fergus County Sheriff's Department, but deputies who visited the site found only a small hole where the disc had been removed. Word of Peterson's discovery spread through the local ranching community, and more listeners began tuning in to KXLO at midnight on Sundays. The mysterious broadcasts continued with mathematical regularity, always featuring the same woman's voice, reading different coordinates each week. The voice never identified itself or explained the purpose of the transmissions. Background noise was minimal, suggesting a professional recording environment, but the signal strength indicated local origin. Local mechanic Ray Hutchinson documented several of these broadcasts on a reel-to-reel tape recorder he borrowed from the high school. His recordings, later examined by audio specialists, revealed subtle inconsistencies in the signal that suggested the transmissions weren't originating from KXLO's equipment. The frequency matched the station's assigned bandwidth, but technical analysis showed slight variations in carrier wave modulation that indicated a separate transmitter operating on the same frequency. More listeners began following the coordinates provided in the midnight broadcasts. Each location yielded similar results: brass discs buried at precisely 18 inches depth, each engraved with future dates ranging from the 1970s to the early 2000s. The discs appeared to be made from the same alloy and showed identical manufacturing characteristics. No two locations were closer than 5 miles apart, and all fell within a roughly circular area extending 30 miles from Lewistown. Dr. Margaret Walsh, a geology professor from Montana State University, traveled to Lewistown in August 1962 to investigate the phenomenon. She conducted soil analysis at several of the coordinate locations and determined that the ground had been disturbed at some point. But the disturbance patterns suggested the disks had been buried months or years earlier, not recently planted by hoaxers. Her metallurgical analysis of the brass disks revealed an unusual composition that didn't match any standard alloy used in local manufacturing. The Federal Communications Commission received multiple complaints about unauthorized transmissions interfering with KXLO's frequency, but investigators who visited Lewistown in September 1962 found no evidence of illegal broadcasting equipment. KXLO's transmitter was thoroughly inspected and found to be operating within normal parameters. The station's equipment showed no signs of tampering, and facility security was minimal enough that unauthorized access would have been obvious. Station manager Robert Kellerman maintained detailed logs of the incidents and attempted to trace the source of the rogue broadcasts using direction-finding equipment borrowed from the Civil Air Patrol. His measurements consistently indicated that the signal originated from the direction of the Judith Mountains, but aerial searches of the area revealed no transmission facilities. The mountainous terrain contained numerous abandoned mining claims and remote cabins, but none showed evidence of radio equipment capable of producing the midnight broadcasts. The broadcasts continued through 1963, but their frequency gradually decreased. Instead of weekly transmissions, they began occurring every 2 weeks, then monthly. The final documented broadcast occurred on Sunday, November 24, 1963, exactly 2 days after President Kennedy's assassination. Several listeners reported that this last transmission included additional content beyond the usual coordinates. The woman's voice allegedly repeated the phrase "series complete" 3 times before falling silent. Local authorities collected a total of 47 brass discs from the coordinates broadcast between 1961 and 1963. The dates engraved on these discs ranged from 1974 to 2003, spanning nearly 30 years. When these dates actually arrived in the real world, nothing unusual was reported to have occurred on any of them. The significance of the dates, if any existed, remained unclear. The Montana Historical Society acquired Hutchinson's tape recordings in 1985, but digital analysis conducted decades later revealed that the recordings had degraded significantly. Audio restoration specialists confirmed that the transmissions were real, but could provide no additional information about their source or purpose. Voice pattern analysis was inconclusive, though experts noted that the speaker maintained perfect pronunciation and timing throughout all recorded segments. KXLO continued normal operations until 1997, when it was sold to a larger broadcasting company and converted to an automated format. The original studio building on Main Street now houses a real estate office, and the station's transmission records from the 1960s were disposed of during the ownership change. None of the brass discs remain in public collections, and their current whereabouts are unknown. Several of the original witnesses have died, and those who remain generally decline to discuss the incident. Carl Peterson, now in his 80s, still lives near Lewistown but refuses interview requests. Ray Hutchinson moved to Oregon in 1978 and died in 2011 without ever speaking publicly about his recordings. Dr. Walsh's research notes were donated to the university library, but the section dealing with the KXLO investigation was removed from her files before donation, according to library staff. The coordinates broadcast during those midnight transmissions were never systematically documented, and attempts to reconstruct the complete list from witness memories have been unsuccessful. Modern GPS technology has allowed researchers to revisit some of the general areas mentioned by witnesses, but decades of agricultural activity and weather have erased any surface evidence of excavation. On quiet Sunday nights in central Montana, radio enthusiasts sometimes scan the frequencies around KXLO's old bandwidth, listening for voices that shouldn't be there. The woman who read coordinates to an audience of puzzled ranchers never identified herself, and her purpose remains as buried as the brass discs she led them to find. Her transmissions ended as abruptly as they began, leaving behind only empty holes in the prairie and questions that spanned decades. Some monuments build themselves in the darkness. The Bear Paw Battlefield sits 16 miles south of Chinook, Montana, where rolling prairie grass meets the northern edge of the Little Rocky Mountains. On October 5, 1877, the final battle of the Nez Perce War ended here, when Chief Joseph surrendered to Colonel Nelson Miles after a 5-day siege. The battlefield preserves the exact location where Chief Joseph spoke his famous words about fighting no more forever, marking the end of an 1,100-mile fighting retreat that had lasted nearly 4 months. The National Park Service designated the site as a National Historic Landmark in 1965, installing interpretive trails and markers across the windswept grassland where Nez Perce families had sheltered in hastily dug rifle pits. The landscape remains largely unchanged from 1877. Short grass prairie extends in all directions, broken only by scattered cottonwood trees along Snake Creek and gentle hills that provided cover for both armies during the siege. Winters are harsh here, with temperatures dropping well below zero and snow covering the ground from November through March. The nearest town is Chinook, a farming community of 1,200 people, and the battlefield typically receives fewer than 5,000 visitors per year. Park rangers patrol the site regularly, but the remoteness means that overnight security relies primarily on motion-activated cameras installed at key locations throughout the preserve. On the morning of October 6, 1994, seasonal park ranger Lisa Martineau arrived for her routine morning inspection to find something that shouldn't have existed. Scattered across the grass near the Chief Joseph surrender marker were 127 smooth river stones, each roughly the size of a chicken egg, arranged in a perfect spiral pattern that measured 37 feet from center to edge. The stones were uniformly gray and appeared to have been polished by water flow, though Snake Creek lay nearly 200 yards away and rarely contained enough water to smooth rocks of that size. Martineau documented the stone formation with photographs and reported the discovery to her supervisor, assuming that visitors had created some kind of unauthorized memorial. The stones showed no evidence of having been recently placed, with grass growing around their edges as if they had been there for weeks. When maintenance crews arrived to remove them, they found that each stone was partially embedded in the soil, requiring significant effort to extract. The grass beneath showed no signs of disturbance, and the soil compression patterns suggested the stones had been in place much longer than a single night. The stone spiral reappeared on October 5, 1995, in exactly the same location and formation. This time, Park Superintendent Donald Crawford had installed additional security cameras and motion sensors around the surrender marker. Review of the overnight footage showed no human activity, no vehicles approaching the site, and no visible process by which the stones appeared. The cameras recorded normal nighttime conditions until approximately 3 a.m., when a brief period of electronic interference affected all recording equipment simultaneously. When the interference cleared, the stone spiral was present and complete. Crawford enlisted the help of Dr. Sarah Runningbear, a geologist from the University of Montana, who specialized in Great Plains mineral formations. Her analysis of the stones revealed they were composed of quartzite typical of riverbeds in the northern Rocky Mountains, but their uniform size and smooth surface texture were unusual for the region. More puzzling was the discovery that the stones contained trace minerals consistent with water sources located more than 200 miles away, suggesting they had originated from distant watersheds. Local Assiniboine and Gros Ventre tribal members, whose reservations lie near the battlefield, were contacted for their perspectives on the phenomenon. Elder Joseph Horn, speaking through an interpreter, described similar stone formations appearing at other historic battle sites, though he declined to provide specific locations or details. Several tribal representatives visited the battlefield in October 1996 but refused to comment publicly on what they observed. The stone spiral phenomenon gained wider attention when journalist Michael Peterson documented it for a regional history magazine in 1997. His article included detailed measurements showing that the spiral followed a mathematical pattern based on the golden ratio, with each stone positioned according to precise geometric relationships. Peterson noted that the formation would have required surveying equipment and considerable planning to create, making the overnight appearance even more inexplicable. Attempts to prevent the stone's appearance proved futile. Park rangers tried covering the area with tarps, installing temporary fencing, and even stationing personnel to maintain continuous visual surveillance. In each case, the stones appeared as scheduled, sometimes materializing beneath the protective coverings or inside the fenced perimeter. Security footage consistently showed the same pattern: electronic interference around 3 a.m., followed by the completed formation with no visible means of creation. The National Park Service commissioned a formal study of the phenomenon in 1998, bringing in archaeologists, geologists, and electronic surveillance specialists. The investigation team, led by Dr. Patricia Vaughn from the Smithsonian Institution, spent 3 months analyzing soil samples, installing seismic monitors, and conducting ground-penetrating radar surveys of the area. Their preliminary findings indicated no subsurface structures or hidden mechanisms that could explain the stone's appearance. Dr. Vaughn's team discovered that the spiral formation aligned precisely with astronomical events occurring on October 5th each year. The pattern pointed towards specific constellations that held significance in Nez Perce traditional astronomy, and the geometric relationships matched proportions found in other Native American ceremonial sites. However, when the team attempted to publish their findings, the National Park Service classified the report and restricted access to the raw data. Local law enforcement became involved in 2001, when vandals attempted to disrupt the formation by scattering the stones and covering the area with concrete. The concrete was found cracked and displaced the following morning, with the stone spiral intact beneath it. Sheriff's deputies investigating the incident reported that their patrol car's electronic systems malfunctioned while parked near the surrender marker, experiencing the same type of interference recorded by park cameras. The phenomenon attracted attention from paranormal investigators and amateur researchers, prompting the Park Service to restrict access to the battlefield during early October each year. Despite these precautions, the stones continued to appear with mechanical regularity. Time-lapse photography attempts yielded only corrupted footage, and electromagnetic field measurements showed unexplained fluctuations during the hours surrounding the stone's manifestation. Dr. Running Bear's continued research revealed additional anomalies in the surrounding area. Soil samples collected from the spiral formation showed elevated levels of rare earth elements that didn't occur naturally in local geology. Plant growth patterns around the stone sites differed from normal prairie vegetation, with grass exhibiting unusual coloration and accelerated growth rates during spring months following each October appearance. The stones themselves proved resistant to conventional analysis. Attempts to chip samples for detailed mineralogical examination resulted in tools breaking or becoming inexplicably dull. When researchers tried removing individual stones for laboratory study, the specimens would vanish from secured storage facilities, only to reappear in their original positions within the spiral formation. Media coverage of the Bear Paw stones peaked in 2003, when a television documentary crew attempted to film the formation process in real time. Their equipment experienced total failure during the critical 3 a.m. time period, and crew members reported feeling disoriented and experiencing gaps in memory. The documentary was never completed, and the production company declined to discuss the reasons for cancellation. Park Service management began downplaying the phenomenon after 2005, removing references to the stone formations from official literature and discouraging ranger discussions with visitors. New personnel assigned to the battlefield received briefings about maintaining professional discretion regarding unusual incidents. Visitor access during October became increasingly restricted, officially due to seasonal maintenance requirements. The most recent documented appearance occurred on October 5, 2022, observed by Ranger Amanda White Cloud during a routine security check. Her report, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, describes the completed formation as identical to previous years, with all 127 stones in their predetermined positions. The report notes that wildlife in the area appears to avoid the formation, with no evidence of animals disturbing the stones throughout the year. Scientists who studied the phenomenon privately speculate about connections between the stone formations and documented electromagnetic anomalies at other historical sites, but no peer-reviewed research has been published. The Smithsonian report remains classified, and requests for declassification have been denied on grounds of protecting archaeological resources. Today, visitors to Bear Paw Battlefield can walk the interpretive trails and read about the historic surrender that ended the Nez Perce War. But they will find no mention of the stones that appear each October to mark the anniversary. The spiral formation continues its annual manifestation, counted and documented by rangers who file their reports in files that few will ever see. Whether the stones honor the memory of those who fell during the 5-day siege or serve some other purpose remains as mysterious as their method of arrival, measured out in perfect intervals that span decades. Some populations are counted long after the last resident has left. Garnet Ghost Town sits at an elevation of 6,000 feet in the Garnet Mountains, 30 miles east of Missoula, Montana. The town reached its peak population of 1,000 residents in 1898 during the height of the gold mining boom, but declining ore yields and harsh winters gradually drove away the miners and their families. By 1940, only a handful of buildings remained occupied, and the last permanent resident, Frank Davy, moved away in 1947 after a winter that saw temperatures drop to 43 degrees below zero. Today, the Bureau of Land Management maintains the site as a preserved ghost town, with 13 original structures still standing among the foundations and debris of what was once a thriving mountain community. The town's isolation is nearly complete during winter months. Snow typically begins falling in October and can reach depths of 8 feet by January. The access road becomes impassable to all but snowmobiles and tracked vehicles, effectively cutting Garnet off from the outside world for 5 months each year. Wildlife is sparse at this elevation, consisting mainly of snowshoe hares, mountain goats, and occasional elk herds that migrate through the area. The silence in winter is profound, broken only by wind through the standing structures and the occasional crack of timber settling under snow loads. On December 22, 1947, Frank Davy returned to Garnet to retrieve belongings he had left behind during his hasty departure earlier that year. He planned to snowshoe in, gather his possessions, and leave the same day. But an unexpected blizzard forced him to take shelter in his former cabin overnight. In a letter to his sister dated January 5, 1948, Davy described waking before dawn to discover dozens of footprint trails crisscrossing the snow-covered town. According to Davy's account, the footprints formed a complex network of paths connecting buildings that were still standing to locations where structures had been demolished years earlier. The tracks showed different boot sizes and walking gaits, suggesting they had been made by multiple individuals of varying heights and ages. Most disturbing to Davy was the discovery that many of the paths led to buildings that had been torn down in the 1930s, as if the track makers were following routes through a version of Garnet that no longer existed. Davy counted 47 distinct sets of footprints, a number that matched exactly the population of Garnet during its final winter of occupation in 1946 to 1947. Each trail began at the edge of town, followed logical walking routes between buildings, and then simply ended in the middle of open spaces with no indication of where the walkers had gone. The snow was fresh from the previous night's storm, and Davy was certain he had been the only living person in the area. Bureau of Land Management caretaker Robert Quinn began documenting similar footprint formations during his winter patrols starting in 1953. Quinn's monthly reports, filed with the BLM district office in Missoula, consistently described the same phenomenon occurring each year on the winter solstice. His photographs, preserved in agency archives, show clear impressions of boot soles in fresh snow, following patterns that remained consistent year after year. Dr. Helen Morrison, an anthropologist from the University of Montana, studied Quinn's reports and visited Garnet in December 1958 to observe the phenomenon firsthand. Her field notes describe arriving at the ghost town on December 20th and finding no unusual activity. She camped in one of the preserved cabins and maintained watch throughout the solstice night. but observed nothing remarkable. When she emerged from the cabin at dawn on December 22nd, the footprint network was complete and undisturbed. Morrison's analysis of the tracks revealed footwear consistent with mining boots and work shoes common in the early 1900s. The stride patterns suggested normal walking speeds and showed no signs of distress or urgency. What puzzled her most was the precision of the routes, which seemed to indicate intimate familiarity with the town's layout during its peak years of operation. Several paths led directly to the sites of buildings that had been demolished decades earlier, information that would not have been obvious to casual visitors. Attempts to witness the tracks being formed proved consistently unsuccessful. Motion-activated cameras installed by the BLM in 1962 recorded no activity during the crucial overnight hours, despite the footprints appearing as scheduled. Time-lapse photography experiments conducted by researchers from Montana State University in 1969 showed only empty snow scenes throughout the night, with a completed footprint network visible in the final frames captured after sunrise. The phenomenon attracted attention from the Montana Historical Society, which commissioned a comprehensive study of the site in 1973. Lead investigator James Crawford spent 3 winter seasons at Garnett, meticulously documenting the footprint formations and comparing them to historical records of the town's population and building layouts. His research revealed that the walking routes corresponded exactly to pathways that would have been logical during the town's active period, including connections to structures like the post office and general store that had been removed in the 1920s. Crawford's most significant discovery involved comparing the footprint patterns to surveyor maps from 1898, when Garnett reached its maximum population. The tracks followed property lines and building-to-building routes that matched the historical layout with remarkable accuracy. This suggested that whoever or whatever created the tracks possessed detailed knowledge of the town's configuration during a specific period more than 70 years in the past. The BLM began restricting winter access to Garnett in 1975, officially citing safety concerns about avalanche danger and extreme weather conditions. Unofficially, agency personnel expressed frustration with the ongoing documentation requirements and media attention surrounding the footprint phenomenon. Caretaker positions at the site experienced high turnover, with several employees requesting transfers after winter assignments at Garnett. Dr. Morrison's research was never published in academic journals, and her field notes were donated to the university library only after her death in 1984. The Montana Historical Society's comprehensive study suffered a similar fate, with Crawford's final report classified as internal agency material and removed from public access. When contacted years later, Crawford declined to discuss his findings and claimed that his memories of the Garnett investigations had become unclear. Modern attempts to study the phenomenon have been hampered by restrictions on winter access and the remote location of the site. Satellite imagery analysis conducted in the 2000s confirmed that the footprint formations continue to appear annually, but the resolution is insufficient to provide detailed documentation. GPS tracking devices placed at the site have malfunctioned consistently during the winter solstice period, recording impossible location data or complete signal loss. Local residents of the nearby Blackfoot Valley occasionally report seeing lights in the direction of Garnett during winter months, though the town lacks electricity and is officially unoccupied. These sightings typically occur around the winter solstice and are described as moving pinpoints of light that suggest lanterns or flashlights being carried through the abandoned streets. Search and rescue teams dispatched to investigate have found no evidence of unauthorized visitors. The most recent documented observation of the Garnett footprints occurred in December 2018, when BLM wildlife biologist Sarah Chen discovered the formations during a routine winter survey. Her official report describes the tracks as consistent with historical documentation and notes that the snow conditions were ideal for preserving clear impressions. Chen's photographs show the familiar network of paths connecting standing buildings to empty foundations, with the characteristic 47 distinct trail patterns. Academic interest in the Garnett phenomenon has diminished over the decades, partly due to restrictions on site access and partly because of the difficulty in studying an event that occurs only once per year in an extremely remote location. The few researchers who have attempted to investigate the footprints have encountered equipment failures, bureaucratic obstacles, and funding challenges that have prevented comprehensive analysis. Today, Garnet remains accessible to summer visitors who can drive the mountain road to explore the preserved buildings and learn about Montana's mining history. Interpretive signs describe the town's rise and fall during the gold rush era, but make no mention of the winter solstice footprints that have appeared annually for more than 70 years. The visitor center closes in October, and the site is officially abandoned to snow and silence until spring. Each December 22nd, the midnight census continues in the empty streets of Garnet, counted by footsteps that measure a population that exists only in the patterns they leave behind. The track's record attendance for a town meeting that ended decades ago, following agendas written in snow that melts away each spring, only to be renewed again when winter returns to the mountains. Some ground never forgets the warmth it once held. Egg Mountain rises from the rolling prairie 15 miles west of Choteau, Montana, a modest hill that gained international recognition in 1978, when paleontologist Jack Horner discovered the first evidence of dinosaur parental care in North America. The site, formerly known as the Willow Creek Anticline, contains one of the world's most significant concentrations of Maiasaura fossils, including intact nesting colonies that revolutionized understanding of dinosaur behavior. The geological formation dates to the late Cretaceous period, approximately 75 million years ago, when this region was a subtropical coastal plain populated by herds of duck-billed dinosaurs that built communal nesting grounds in the sedimentary mud. The surrounding landscape consists of typical Great Plains terrain, with short grass prairie extending toward the rocky mountain front. The climate is semi-arid, with hot summers and cold winters characteristic of the northern high plains. Choteau itself sits at the edge of the overthrust belt, where ancient seafloor sediments were pushed eastward during mountain formation. The area experiences dramatic temperature variations between seasons, with summer highs reaching the 90s and winter lows dropping below zero. Wind patterns are predictable, generally flowing from west to east across the relatively flat terrain. Dr. Margaret Kellner, a graduate student working on Horner's team in 1981, first documented the temperature anomaly while conducting systematic excavations in the main nesting area. Her field notes record ambient air temperatures of 68 degrees Fahrenheit at the base camp, located 100 yards from the primary dig site. When she moved her equipment to the fossil-bearing strata, where the Maiasaura nests had been uncovered, her thermometers consistently read 91 degrees, a difference of 23 degrees that persisted regardless of time of day or weather conditions. Kellner initially assumed her instruments were malfunctioning and borrowed additional thermometers from other team members. All devices showed identical readings, and calibration tests conducted away from the dig site confirmed their accuracy. She began taking measurements at various points around Egg Mountain and discovered that the temperature elevation followed a precise boundary that corresponded exactly to the areas where dinosaur nests had been excavated. The anomaly affected both air temperature and ground temperature at depths up to 3 feet below the surface. Digital thermometers, analog gauges, and infrared temperature guns all recorded the same 23-degree elevation within the nesting zone. Outside this area, temperatures returned to normal regional readings within a distance of 10 to 15 feet, creating a sharply defined thermal boundary that defied conventional explanation. Dr. Robert Chen, a geophysicist from Montana State University, joined the research team in 1982 to investigate potential geological causes for the temperature readings. His preliminary surveys detected no evidence of geothermal activity, underground hot springs, or subsurface volcanic features that could account for the heat source. Core samples taken from the anomaly zone showed normal mineral composition and no indication of chemical processes that might generate elevated temperatures. Chen's electromagnetic surveys revealed unusual readings within the nesting area, suggesting the presence of materials with different conductive properties than the surrounding sedimentary rock. However, Subsequent drilling failed to locate any distinct geological formations that could explain both the electromagnetic signatures and the temperature anomaly. The thermal boundary remained stable regardless of seasonal changes, maintaining the same 23-degree differential through winter months when ambient temperatures dropped well below freezing. Local ranchers who had worked the land before the dinosaur discoveries confirmed that livestock had always behaved strangely in the area that would later be identified as the nesting zone. Cattle would gather in this specific location during cold weather, apparently seeking warmth that wasn't visible to human observation. Ranch hand Tom Wickham, who worked the property during the 1970s, recalled that snow would melt faster in certain patches of ground, creating irregular bare spots that seemed to follow no logical pattern until the nest sites were mapped. Dr. Horner's official excavation reports mention the temperature readings but offer no explanation for the phenomenon. His team continued documenting the thermal anomaly through 1985, when funding for the project was redirected to other paleontological sites. The temperature data was included in scientific papers describing the Maiasaura discoveries, but the thermal anomaly received minimal attention compared to the revolutionary findings about dinosaur nesting behavior. Attempts to study the phenomenon intensified in 1987 when Dr. Sarah Martinez, a thermodynamics specialist from the University of Colorado, received permission to conduct detailed measurements at Egg Mountain. Her sophisticated equipment confirmed the 23-degree temperature elevation and revealed additional anomalies, including unusual infrared emissions and electromagnetic field variations that peaked during nighttime hours. Martinez's research proposal for a comprehensive 3-year study was initially approved by the landowner and the Museum of the Rockies, but funding was withdrawn after 6 months without explanation. Her preliminary data, later obtained through academic records requests, showed that the thermal boundary had remained stable for at least 5 years since Kellner's initial observations, suggesting a permanent rather than temporary phenomenon. The site attracted attention from the United States Geological Survey in 1989, when satellite thermal imaging detected the Egg Mountain anomaly as a distinct heat signature visible from space. USGS investigators spent 2 weeks at the location conducting seismic surveys, ground-penetrating radar scans, and chemical analysis of soil samples. Their final report, classified as preliminary findings only, acknowledged the temperature readings but concluded that no conventional geological processes could account for the observed thermal patterns. Media coverage of the temperature anomaly peaked in 1991 when a documentary crew from the Discovery Channel visited Egg Mountain to film a segment about unusual paleontological sites. Their thermal imaging cameras clearly showed the 23-degree temperature differential, and interviews with researchers confirmed that the phenomenon had persisted for more than a decade. However, the segment was edited to focus primarily on the dinosaur discoveries, with only brief mention of the thermal readings. Academic interest in the anomaly declined through the 1990s as the original research team dispersed to other projects, and new excavations at Egg Mountain became less frequent. The landowner, increasingly concerned about trespassing and unauthorized research activities, began restricting access to the site and requiring advance permission for any scientific studies. Several graduate students who attempted to include the thermal anomaly in their dissertations found their research discouraged by academic advisors who considered the topic too speculative for serious paleontological work. Dr. Kellner, who continued monitoring the temperature readings during occasional visits through 2003, reported that the anomaly remained consistent across more than 20 years of observation. Her final measurements, taken just before the site was closed to unauthorized research, showed the same 23-degree elevation that she had first documented as a graduate student. She noted that the thermal boundary had actually become more precisely defined over time, as if the effect was somehow strengthening or stabilizing. The Museum of the Rockies maintains extensive records of the Egg Mountain excavations, including thousands of photographs, fossil specimens, and field notes documenting the revolutionary discoveries about dinosaur behavior. However, requests for access to the temperature monitoring data are routinely denied, and museum staff claim that most of the thermal research records were lost during a computer system upgrade in 2007. Current satellite imagery shows that the Egg Mountain thermal anomaly remains detectable from space, appearing as a small but distinct warm spot in infrared photographs taken during winter months. The site itself is now protected as private property, and the landowner no longer permits paleontological research or public access. The original nest sites are gradually being reclaimed by prairie grass, though the areas where Maiasaura fossils were discovered can still be identified by subtle differences in vegetation growth patterns. Today, Egg Mountain sits quietly under the vast Montana sky, its surface showing no visible signs of the groundbreaking discoveries made there decades ago. The thermometers that once documented impossible readings have been packed away, and the researchers who witnessed the 23-degree anomaly have moved on to other projects. Yet beneath the prairie grass, in soil layers that preserve the traces of ancient nesting grounds, something continues to maintain a temperature that defies explanation, as if the warmth of creatures that brooded their eggs 75 million years ago still lingers in the earth they once called home. Some echoes arrive before the sound that creates them. Going to the Sun Road cuts 50 miles through the heart of Glacier National Park in northwestern Montana, climbing from the shores of Lake McDonald to the Continental Divide at Logan Pass before descending toward St. Mary Lake. Construction began in 1921 and took 11 years to complete, requiring crews to blast ledges from vertical cliff faces and build retaining walls across unstable talus slopes. The road reaches its highest point at 6,644 feet elevation, where the alpine environment transitions from dense forest to barren rock and permanent snowfields. During winter months, snow depths can exceed 30 feet, and the road is completely closed to vehicle traffic from October through June. The most challenging section lies between Avalanche Creek and the Loop, where the road follows a narrow shelf carved into the garden wall, a knife-edge ridge that separates two major watersheds. Here, drivers navigate hairpin turns while vertical rock faces rise thousands of feet above and plunge equally far below. The acoustics in this section are unusual due to the parallel cliff walls and the specific angle of the road relative to the surrounding terrain. Sound bounces unpredictably between rock faces, creating echoes that can persist for several seconds and seem to originate from multiple directions simultaneously. Maintenance Supervisor Carl Hendricks first documented the anomaly in his daily log on June 15, 1973, during pre-dawn inspection runs before the road opened for tourist traffic. He noted that while starting his pickup truck at mile marker 27, he heard the distinct sound of his engine turning over approximately 3 seconds before he actually turned the ignition key. The delayed engine sound that followed his key turn seemed muffled compared to the initial echo, as if the real engine noise was somehow less substantial than its temporal predecessor. Hendricks initially dismissed the experience as fatigue from early morning shifts, but the phenomenon repeated during subsequent pre-dawn patrols. He began documenting the exact timing and discovered that the reversed echo only occurred during a specific 5-minute window between 4:42 and 4:47 a.m. Outside this time frame, engine sounds produced normal echoes that followed rather than preceded the original noise. The effect was strongest at mile marker 27, but could be detected as far as 200 yards in either direction along the road. The anomaly affected all types of vehicles and mechanical sounds. Diesel engines, gasoline engines, and even electric motors produced the same temporal displacement, with their echoes consistently arriving 3 seconds before the actual sound. The reversed echoes were clear enough that Hendricks could identify specific engine characteristics, including the number of cylinders and the condition of exhaust systems. Despite hearing them before the engines were actually started, Park Ranger Susan Martinez began accompanying Hendricks on his early morning runs in 1974 to verify the reports. Her field notes describe the disorienting experience of hearing her own voice echo back from the cliff walls before she spoke, though this vocal displacement was less consistent than the mechanical sound effects. She noted that the phenomenon created a sense of temporal displacement that made normal conversation difficult during the 5-minute window when the effects were active. Dr. James Patterson, an acoustic engineer from the University of Montana, visited the site in July 1974 to investigate the reported sound anomalies. His initial measurements, using standard audio equipment, detected normal echo patterns consistent with the local topography. However, when he conducted tests during the specific early morning time frame reported by park personnel, his instruments recorded acoustic signatures that violated basic principles of sound propagation. Patterson's detailed analysis revealed that sound waves appeared to be traveling backward through time within the affected zone. His oscilloscope recordings showed engine noise signatures appearing on the displays before the corresponding sounds were generated, a phenomenon that contradicted fundamental laws of physics regarding cause and effect relationships. Multiple calibrations of his equipment confirmed that the instruments were functioning correctly and that the temporal displacement was a real acoustic event. The research attracted attention from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which dispatched a team of specialists to conduct more sophisticated measurements in August 1974. Their equipment included atomic clocks, synchronized to national time standards, and high-precision audio recording devices capable of detecting microsecond-level timing discrepancies. The team confirmed Patterson's findings and documented that the reversed echoes preceded their source sounds by exactly 3.07 seconds, with timing accuracy that remained constant across multiple test sessions. Local Blackfeet tribal members, whose reservation borders the eastern edge of Glacier National Park, were consulted about traditional knowledge regarding acoustic anomalies in the area. Elder Joseph Running Wolf described similar reports from hunting parties who had traveled through the region before the road was built, but noted that the tribal knowledge focused on visual rather than auditory phenomena. He mentioned that certain areas along the Continental Divide were considered places where time moved differently, though specific details of these traditions were not shared with outside researchers. The National Institute team's investigation was terminated abruptly in September 1974 when funding for the project was withdrawn without explanation. Team leader Dr. Robert Chen later stated in private correspondence that the research had attracted unwanted attention from government agencies concerned about the implications of documenting temporal anomalies in a public location. His final report was classified and removed from open scientific literature, despite initial plans for publication in peer-reviewed journals. Attempts to replicate the acoustic measurements using civilian equipment continued sporadically through the 1980s. Amateur researchers and curiosity seekers occasionally visited mile marker 27 during the early morning hours, but most lacked the sophisticated timing equipment necessary to document the phenomenon properly. Park officials began discouraging these activities due to safety concerns about vehicles stopping on the narrow mountain road during low visibility conditions. The phenomenon gained broader attention in 1989 when travel writer Michael Harrison described his experience with the reversed echoes in a magazine article about unusual attractions in national parks. His account led to increased visitor interest in the site, but also prompted the National Park Service to implement restrictions on early morning access to Going to the Sun Road. Official policies cited wildlife protection and road maintenance schedules as the primary reasons for limiting dawn access. Dr. Patterson continued monitoring the acoustic anomaly during annual visits through 1992, using increasingly sophisticated portable equipment to document the temporal displacement. His measurements showed that the 3-second time differential remained constant over nearly 2 decades, suggesting that whatever caused the phenomenon was stable rather than gradually changing. However, he noted subtle variations in the clarity and intensity of the reversed echoes that seemed to correlate with seasonal weather patterns and barometric pressure changes. The last documented scientific measurement of the reversed echo effect occurred in 1995 when a team from the Colorado School of Mines conducted a brief study using digital audio analysis techniques that had not been available to earlier researchers. Their findings confirmed the existence of the temporal displacement, but added the disturbing detail that the reversed echoes showed signs of acoustic aging, as if the sounds had traveled not just backward in time, but also across vast distances before returning to their point of origin. Access to the specific section of Going to the Sun Road during the crucial early morning hours became increasingly restricted after 2001, when new park regulations limited vehicle access to authorized personnel only during pre-dawn hours. The official justification focused on protecting fragile alpine ecosystems from disturbance during critical wildlife activity periods. But the timing coincided with renewed government interest in acoustic anomalies following advances in temporal physics research. Modern GPS and digital timing systems have made precise measurement of the phenomenon theoretically easier, but obtaining permission for research activities at the site has become nearly impossible. Requests for scientific access are routinely denied, and park personnel are instructed not to discuss acoustic anomalies with visitors. The maintenance logs that once documented Carl Hendricks' observations were transferred to central archives and are no longer available for public review. Going to the Sun Road continues to operate as one of America's most scenic mountain drives, carrying hundreds of thousands of visitors each year through some of the most spectacular alpine terrain in North America. Tourists photograph the dramatic vistas and marvel at the engineering achievement represented by the narrow road carved into impossible cliff faces, but they travel during daylight hours when echoes behave according to conventional physics. In the brief window between 4:42 and 4:47 each morning, when mist rises from the valleys below and the first hint of dawn touches the highest peaks, mile marker 27 waits in silence. The maintenance crews, who once documented impossible sounds, have retired or transferred to other locations, taking their memories of engines that echoed before they started and voices that replied before questions were asked. The rocks remember everything, but they no longer have witnesses to translate what the stone faces are trying to say about time moving in directions that maps cannot show. Fort Benton sits on the banks of the Missouri River in north-central Montana, a town of 1,400 residents that once served as the head of navigation for steamboat traffic traveling upriver from St. Louis. Established in 1846 as a fur trading post, the settlement grew into a crucial supply depot during the Montana gold rush of the 1860s. Steamboats could travel nearly 3,000 miles from the Mississippi Delta to Fort Benton's docks, making it the farthest inland port in North America. The town's strategic location at the confluence of the Missouri River and overland trails to the mining camps earned it the nickname Birthplace of Montana and made it briefly one of the most important commercial centers in the American West. The Missouri River flows past Fort Benton in a series of lazy curves, its banks lined with cottonwood trees and willows that have witnessed the passage of Lewis and Clark, fur traders, gold seekers, and modern barges carrying grain from the northern plains. The river's channel has shifted multiple times over the centuries, leaving oxbow lakes and abandoned meander scars that mark its former paths across the floodplain. During spring runoff, the Missouri can rise 20 feet above its normal level, occasionally flooding the lower sections of town and reminding residents that the river remains an untamed force despite multiple upstream dams built for flood control and navigation. On March 15, 1982, Postal Clerk Dorothy Chen discovered an unusual letter in the morning mail delivery at the Fort Benton post office. The envelope bore no return address and was addressed simply to the River Keeper in careful cursive handwriting using blue ink that appeared faded despite the letter's recent postmark. The postmark itself showed Fort Benton as the origin point, though no one at the post office recalled processing the letter for outgoing mail. When Chen opened the envelope, she found a single sheet of cream-colored paper containing one sentence written in the same blue ink. "The water remembers what we tried to forget." Chen filed the letter with other undeliverable mail, assuming it was either a prank or a mistake. However, the same letter arrived again on March 15, 1983, bearing identical handwriting, identical paper, and the identical message. The postmark again showed local origin, but postal workers insisted they had not processed any outgoing mail matching the description. Over the following years, the pattern continued with mechanical regularity, prompting Chen to begin documenting each letter's arrival with photographs and detailed notes. Postmaster Robert Harrison, who supervised the Fort Benton office from 1985 through 2003, became increasingly concerned about the annual letters as they continued arriving without explanation. His attempts to trace the source through Postal Service channels yielded no results, and security cameras installed in 1991 failed to capture anyone depositing the letters in collection boxes or mail slots. The letters simply appeared in the incoming mail sorted by regional processing centers, always bearing Fort Benton postmarks dated March 14th despite arriving on March 15th. Harrison contacted the United States Postal Inspection Service in 1994 to investigate potential mail fraud or tampering. Inspector Patricia Walsh examined multiple years' worth of the identical letters and confirmed that they were genuine postal items that had traveled through normal mail processing channels. However, she could not explain how letters postmarked in Fort Benton could enter the mail system without being deposited at the local post office or processed by local postal workers who had no memory of handling them. Forensic analysis of the letters revealed several puzzling characteristics. The paper was identified as a high-quality stock manufactured by the Crane Paper Company, but the specific watermark pattern had not been used since 1947. The blue ink showed signs of age inconsistent with recent writing, displaying fading and chemical changes typically associated with documents several decades old. Most disturbing was the handwriting analysis conducted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which confirmed that all letters had been written by the same individual using consistent pen pressure, letter formation, and writing angles that suggested a practiced, elderly hand. Local historian Margaret Steele researched historical records to identify potential connections between the letter's message and Fort Benton's past. Her investigation uncovered multiple incidents involving the Missouri River that had been deliberately omitted from official town histories. These included a steamboat accident in 1868 that killed 19 passengers, whose bodies were never recovered, a cholera outbreak in 1870 that resulted in mass burials along the riverbank, and the unexplained disappearance of a government surveyor in 1874 while mapping river channel changes. Steele's most significant discovery involved the position of River Keeper, an unofficial title that appeared in 19th century correspondence and newspaper accounts, but was never formally defined. References to river keepers appeared in connection with maintaining navigation channels, recovering bodies from the river, and conducting ceremonies for those lost to the Missouri's currents. The last documented mention of a river keeper in Fort Benton occurred in 1881, shortly before the arrival of the railroad reduced the town's dependence on river transportation. The annual letters attracted attention from paranormal investigators and amateur researchers, but the Fort Benton Post Office discouraged public discussion of the phenomenon. Postal regulations prohibited releasing mail to unauthorized recipients, even letters addressed to fictional or historical titles, creating a legal barrier that prevented outside examination of the original documents. Harrison's successor, appointed in 2004, implemented policies that restricted media access to postal facilities and prohibited staff from discussing unusual mail incidents with reporters. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a linguistics professor from the University of Montana, obtained permission to examine photocopies of the letters in 2006 as part of research into regional historical documents. Her analysis confirmed that the handwriting showed characteristics consistent with someone educated in penmanship during the late 19th century, when formal cursive instruction emphasized specific letter formations and connecting strokes. She noted that the writing quality remained remarkably consistent across decades of letters, showing no signs of the deterioration typically associated with aging or illness. Carbon dating analysis conducted on paper fibers in 2008 yielded contradictory results. Some samples indicated manufactured during the 1940s, consistent with the watermark identification, while others showed dates ranging from the 1880s through the 1920s. The ink composition analysis revealed a formula that matched fountain pen inks popular during the early 1900s. But chemical degradation patterns suggested the letters had been written at different times rather than stored as a collection and mailed annually. The most recent documented letter arrived on March 15, 2022, bearing the same handwriting, the same message, and the same mysterious routing through postal systems that showed no record of processing it. Current Postmaster David Kim maintains the official position that the letters represent an elaborate hoax, though he acknowledges that 40 years of identical forgeries would require extraordinary dedication and access to historically appropriate materials. Attempts to identify the sender through DNA analysis of envelope adhesive have been unsuccessful due to contamination from postal processing equipment and the advanced age of the samples. Fingerprint analysis has similarly yielded no matches in law enforcement databases, though partial prints recovered from the letters show ridge patterns consistent with someone who performed manual labor, possibly related to river work or dock operations. The Fort Benton Museum displays some of the town's historical letters and documents, but makes no mention of the annual Riverkeeper correspondence. Museum Director Carol Thompson, when questioned about the letters, states that the museum focuses on documented historical events rather than contemporary mysteries. She notes that many frontier-era records were lost to fires, floods, and simple neglect, making it impossible to verify claims about historical positions or individuals mentioned in unprovenance documents. Today, the Fort Benton Post Office continues to receive its annual letter each March 15th, filed away with other undeliverable mail in accordance with postal regulations. The identity of the Riverkeeper remains as mysterious as the person who continues to write to them, maintaining a correspondence that spans decades with someone who may never have existed, or who existed so long ago that only the river itself remembers their name. The Missouri flows past Fort Benton as it has for thousands of years, carrying spring snowmelt toward the distant sea and keeping whatever secrets lie buried in its shifting channels. On quiet March mornings, when ice begins to break up along the riverbank and the first signs of spring appear in the cottonwood groves, postal workers sort through the day's mail delivery, never quite certain whether this will be the year when the annual letter fails to arrive, or whether some mysteries are destined to continue as long as the river runs and memory endures in the sediment of time. Some paths measure distance in minutes that never existed. Makoshika State Park stretches across 11,532 acres of badlands terrain near Glendive, Montana, where millions of years of erosion have carved dramatic formations from layers of sedimentary rock. The name Makoshika derives from the Lakota phrase Makosika, meaning bad land or bad earth, reflecting the harsh landscape that challenged both prehistoric creatures and human travelers. The park preserves one of the most significant dinosaur fossil sites in North America, where paleontologists have uncovered remains of Triceratops, Tyrannosaurus rex, and dozens of other species that lived during the final period of the Mesozoic era, 65 million years ago. The Caprock Nature Trail winds through the heart of the park's most spectacular formations, following a well-maintained path that leads hikers past towering sandstone pillars, narrow canyons, and overlooks offering panoramic views of the Yellowstone River Valley. The trail measures exactly 3.7 miles from the visitor center to the prominent Caprock Formation that gives the trail its name, with an elevation gain of 412 feet over relatively gentle terrain. Park rangers estimate that most visitors complete the round trip in approximately 2.5 hours, including time for photography and rest stops at designated viewpoints. The temporal anomaly was first documented by park ranger Michael Torres on August 14, 1996, during a routine trail inspection. Torres began his hike at 9:15 a.m., according to his digital watch, planning to complete maintenance tasks and return to the visitor center by noon. When he arrived back at his vehicle, his watch displayed 12:57 p.m., indicating that the hike had taken 3 hours and 42 minutes instead of the expected 2.5 hours. More puzzling was Torres's complete inability to account for the extra time. despite clear memories of hiking the trail at a normal pace with no unusual delays. Torres initially attributed the discrepancy to distraction or equipment malfunction, but the same thing happened during his next trail inspection on August 21st. This time, he carried 2 watches and a battery-powered clock, all synchronized before departure. All 3 timepieces showed identical readings when he returned, confirming that he had indeed lost track of time during the hike. His field notes from that day describe a growing sense of unease about the trail, though he could identify no specific reason for his discomfort. Word of Torres's experience spread among park staff, and other rangers began timing their hikes on the Cap Rock Trail with increasing precision. Seasonal ranger Linda Chen documented 17 instances between September 1996 and May 1997 where she experienced time loss ranging from 45 minutes to 1 hour and 20 minutes. Her detailed logs showed that the phenomenon occurred regardless of weather conditions, time of day, or hiking pace, suggesting that the temporal displacement was related to the location rather than external factors. Visitor reports of similar experiences began accumulating in the park's comment logs during the 1997 summer season. Family groups would start the hike together, maintain normal conversation throughout the walk, and arrive back at their cars to discover that significantly more time had elapsed than they remembered. Children seemed particularly affected, with several parents noting that their young hikers appeared unusually tired despite claims of feeling energetic throughout the hike. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a chronobiology researcher from Montana State University, visited Makoshika in September 1997 to investigate the reported time distortions. She equipped volunteers with synchronized digital watches, GPS tracking devices, and heart rate monitors to gather objective data about their trail experiences. Her preliminary findings confirmed that subjects consistently lost between 55 and 65 minutes during the hike, with GPS data showing continuous movement along the trail throughout the missing time period. Mitchell's GPS tracking revealed the most disturbing aspect of the phenomenon. Subjects continued walking and navigating the trail normally during the missing hour, but retained no conscious memory of this period. The tracking data showed steady progress along the trail route, appropriate rest stops at designated viewpoints, and normal movement patterns that suggested alert, purposeful hiking. Yet when questioned immediately after their return, subjects could not account for the missing time and insisted they had completed the hike in the expected 2.5 hours. Local residents of Glendive, when asked about unusual experiences in the Makoshika area, provided accounts that extended the mystery beyond the park boundaries. Rancher Tom Bradley, whose property borders the park's eastern edge, reported that cattle would sometimes wander onto his land from the direction of the Badlands in a state of apparent confusion, with no injuries but displaying behavior suggesting disorientation. His veterinarian found no medical explanation for these episodes, which typically occurred during late summer months. The phenomenon attracted attention from the University of Montana's psychology department, which conducted a formal study in summer 1998 involving 40 volunteers who hiked the Cap Rock Trail while wearing multiple timepieces and carrying voice recorders to document their experiences. Project leader Dr. James Crawford's final report, completed in December 1998, confirmed the time loss phenomenon in 37 of 40 subjects, with an average temporal displacement of 58 minutes. Crawford's research revealed additional disturbing details about the missing time periods. Voice recordings made by subjects showed normal conversation and commentary throughout the first portion of their hikes, followed by gaps in audio recording that corresponded exactly to the missing time periods. When recording resumed, subjects continued their conversations as if no time had passed, often completing sentences they had begun an hour earlier with no awareness of the interruption. Medical monitoring during the hikes showed that subjects' heart rates, blood pressure, and stress indicators remained within normal ranges throughout the experience, including during the missing time periods when GPS tracking showed they were actively hiking. This physiological data suggested that the hikers were not experiencing lapses in consciousness or entering altered states of awareness, but rather continuing to function normally while somehow existing outside their own temporal perception. The Montana Department of Health conducted environmental testing at Makoshika in 1999 to investigate potential causes for the reported time distortions. Air quality measurements detected no unusual gases or atmospheric conditions that might affect cognitive function. Electromagnetic field readings throughout the trail area fell within normal ranges, and geological surveys found no evidence of unusual mineral compositions or underground formations that could influence human perception. The National Institute of Mental Health expressed interest in the Makoshika research and requested access to Crawford's data in 2001, but the request was denied by university administrators who cited privacy concerns regarding the volunteer subjects. Crawford's research files were subsequently transferred to restricted archives, and requests for access to the data have been routinely rejected. Crawford himself accepted a position at a private research facility in 2002 and has declined all interview requests regarding his Makoshika studies. Park management began discouraging discussion of the time loss phenomenon after several news media reports in 2003 generated unwanted attention from curiosity seekers and amateur investigators. New interpretive signs installed along the Caprock Trail focus exclusively on geological and paleontological features, with no mention of timing recommendations or temporal anomalies. Ranger training materials now include instructions to redirect visitor questions about time distortions towards standard natural history topics. The most comprehensive study of the Makoshika time loss was conducted by Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a neuroscientist from Johns Hopkins University, who obtained special permission to research the phenomenon in 2007. Her team used advanced brain imaging equipment to monitor subjects before, during, and after their hikes, hoping to identify neurological explanations for the temporal displacement. The study was terminated after 6 weeks when equipment began malfunctioning consistently within the park boundaries, producing readings that technicians described as impossible. Current park policy requires hikers to register at the visitor center before beginning the Caprock Trail and to check in upon their return, ostensibly for safety purposes. Staff members note the times on these registration forms, but are instructed not to comment on any discrepancies between expected and actual hiking durations. Annual park reports continue to list average trail completion times as 2.5 hours, making no reference to the temporal anomalies documented by multiple research studies. The Caprock Nature Trail remains one of Makoshika's most popular attractions, drawing thousands of visitors each year who come to experience the dramatic Badlands scenery and search for dinosaur fossils exposed in the ancient rock formations. Trail markers provide standard information about geological processes and prehistoric life, guiding hikers through landscapes that preserve evidence of events from 65 million years ago in sedimentary layers that accumulated grain by grain across incomprehensible spans of time. Today, visitors walk the trail carrying phones that automatically synchronize with atomic clocks, devices capable of measuring time to fractions of seconds across global networks. Yet, somewhere along the path between the visitor center and the Caprock Formation, between the familiar tick of one moment and the next, an hour disappears, as completely as the creatures whose bones lie buried in the surrounding stone, leaving only the evidence of its absence and the quiet certainty that time, like memory, follows rules that maps cannot explain. Some images refuse to be captured, no matter how perfectly they're framed. Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument preserves the site where Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and 268 members of the 7th Cavalry died on June 25, 1876, during one of the most famous battles in American military history. The battlefield spans nearly 765 acres of rolling prairie in southeastern Montana, where the Little Bighorn River winds through grassland that looks much the same as it did during the battle. The Last Stand Monument, a granite obelisk erected in 1881, marks the approximate location where Custer and his immediate command made their final stand against overwhelming numbers of Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors. The monument itself stands 51 feet tall on Last Stand Hill, the highest point of the battlefield, overlooking the river valley where thousands of Native American fighters had gathered for what would become their greatest military victory against the United States Army. Marble headstones scattered across the hillside mark the locations where soldiers' bodies were found, creating a somber memorial landscape that attracts more than 300,000 visitors annually. The site operates as both a national monument and a working archaeological preserve, where researchers continue to uncover artifacts and evidence that provide new insights into the battle's final moments. Photography instructor David Marshall first documented the anomaly during a workshop at Little Bighorn in September 1989. Marshall had brought 12 students to the battlefield to practice landscape photography techniques, focusing on the interplay between natural lighting and historical monuments. When the group attempted to photograph the Last Stand Monument during the afternoon session, multiple cameras produced identical results: clear images of the surrounding landscape with an empty space where the 51-foot granite obelisk should have appeared. Marshall initially suspected equipment failure and borrowed cameras from other visitors to test the phenomenon. Every camera, regardless of manufacturer or film type, produced the same result when pointed at the monument between approximately 2:30 and 3:30 p.m. The granite obelisk remained clearly visible to all observers throughout this period, casting normal shadows and reflecting sunlight as expected, but refused to register on photographic film. Images taken immediately before and after the affected time window captured the monument normally. The anomaly affected both color and black and white film, 35mm and medium format cameras, and professional equipment from multiple manufacturers. Marshall documented his findings with time-stamped photographs showing the progression of the phenomenon. Normal images at 2:25 p.m. Empty spaces where the monument should appear at 2:45 p.m. and normal documentation resuming at 3:35 p.m. The grass, headstones, and other monuments throughout the battlefield photographed normally during the entire period. Park interpreter Susan Crow Dog, a member of the Lakota tribe whose ancestors fought in the battle, confirmed that other visitors had reported similar photographic difficulties over the years. Her informal survey of tourist complaints revealed a pattern of camera malfunctions and unexplained photographic results that visitors typically attributed to equipment problems rather than supernatural causes. Crow Dog noted that many Native American visitors chose not to photograph the Last Stand Monument at all, following traditional beliefs about capturing images at burial sites. Professional photographer James Weber documented the phenomenon extensively during a commercial assignment for a historical magazine in July 1991. Weber's detailed logs show that the photographic anomaly occurred with absolute consistency during the specified time window, affecting high-end camera equipment and multiple film stocks. His attempts to photograph the monument from different angles and distances produced identical results: clear documentation of everything except the granite obelisk itself. Weber's most disturbing discovery involved time-lapse photography experiments conducted from a fixed position overlooking the monument. His motorized camera system, programmed to take photographs every 30 seconds throughout the afternoon, showed the monument gradually fading from images as 2:30 p.m. approached, completely disappearing during the crucial hour, then slowly reappearing as normal photographic conditions returned. The time-lapse sequence suggested that the phenomenon followed a precise schedule rather than occurring randomly. Dr. Patricia Chen, a photography technology specialist from the Rochester Institute of Technology, visited the battlefield in August 1992 to investigate potential technical explanations for the reported camera failures. Her analysis of affected film samples revealed normal chemical development with no signs of exposure problems, light leaks, or processing errors. The areas where the monument should have appeared showed proper exposure levels for the surrounding landscape, as if the granite structure had been digitally removed from otherwise normal photographs. Chen's electromagnetic field measurements detected unusual readings in the immediate vicinity of the Last Stand Monument during the affected time period. Her instruments recorded fluctuations in magnetic field strength that corresponded exactly to the timing of the photographic anomalies. However, these electromagnetic variations were too subtle to affect camera mechanisms or film chemistry, according to conventional understanding of photographic technology. The phenomenon began affecting digital cameras as they became more common during the late 1990s. Digital imaging systems malfunctioned entirely during the 2:30 to 3:30 time window, displaying error messages, freezing, or shutting down automatically when aimed at the monument. Unlike film cameras, which simply failed to record the monument's image, digital devices refused to function at all in its presence during the affected hours. National Park Service officials acknowledged the photographic anomalies in internal memoranda obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, but public discussion of the phenomenon was discouraged. Rangers received instructions to suggest that visitors experiencing camera problems try different angles or lighting conditions, without mentioning the specific time-related pattern. Official park literature makes no reference to photographic difficulties, and visitor center staff are trained to redirect questions about camera malfunctions toward general troubleshooting advice. The battlefield's chief of interpretation, Robert Sterling, served in that position from 1993 through 2008 and compiled detailed records of visitor complaints related to photography equipment. His confidential reports document hundreds of incidents involving camera failures, unexplained photographic results, and equipment malfunctions that followed the established temporal pattern. Sterling noted that the frequency of complaints increased dramatically as digital cameras became more sophisticated, suggesting that newer technology was more sensitive to whatever force affected the imaging process. Multiple attempts to document the phenomenon for television and print media have been unsuccessful due to the same technical limitations that affect visitor photography. Documentary crews have found their equipment unusable during the crucial afternoon hours, forcing them to rely on time-lapse photography and indirect evidence rather than direct documentation of the anomaly. Professional photographers commissioned to illustrate articles about the battlefield consistently deliver images that show empty spaces where the monument should appear in afternoon shots. The Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History requested permission to conduct a comprehensive study of the photographic anomaly in 2003, proposing to use cutting-edge imaging technology and electromagnetic analysis equipment. The National Park Service denied the request, citing concerns about disrupting normal visitor activities and the potential for research equipment to damage the historical site. Subsequent requests from academic institutions have received similar rejections. Local photography shops in nearby Billings and Hardin report occasional customers seeking explanations for ruined film from Little Bighorn visits, though many visitors assume their camera problems resulted from user error rather than environmental factors. Shop owner Maria Santos, who has developed film from battlefield visitors since 1985, estimates that 5 to 10% of customers return with complaints about images that failed to capture the Last Stand monument properly. Modern smartphone cameras experience similar malfunctions to professional digital equipment, often displaying system crashes or completely blank images when attempting to photograph the monument during the affected time period. Social media posts from battlefield visitors occasionally reference inexplicable camera problems, though most users attribute the issues to technical glitches rather than location-specific phenomena. The Last Stand monument continues to draw photographers who hope to capture the perfect image of this iconic American landmark, unaware that their afternoon efforts may be doomed to failure regardless of their technical skill or equipment quality. Tour groups gather around the granite obelisk throughout the day, posing for commemorative photographs that will preserve their visit to this historic site. Except for those taken during the hour when cameras forget how to see what eyes observe clearly. In the visitor center darkroom, now converted to digital workstations, park staff process thousands of images each year that document every aspect of the battlefield experience. Yet somewhere in those archived files, in the gaps between successful photographs and the complaints filed by confused visitors, lies evidence of an hour each day when history refuses to be captured when the memorial to Custer's last stand becomes invisible to every lens except the human eye, preserving its secrets in the space between what happened and what can be recorded. Some ice refuses to freeze according to the laws of nature. Flathead Lake stretches 27 miles long and 15 miles wide across the Flathead Valley in northwestern Montana, making it the largest natural freshwater lake west of the Mississippi River. The lake sits at an elevation of 2,893 feet, surrounded by the Mission Mountains to the east and the Salish Mountains to the west. Glacial activity carved the lake basin during the last ice age, creating a body of water that reaches depths of 371 feet and contains enough water to cover the entire state of Montana to a depth of 9.5 inches. The Flathead River flows north from the lake toward the Canadian border, eventually joining the Columbia River system. Native Salish and Kootenai tribes have lived around Flathead Lake for thousands of years, developing detailed knowledge of seasonal patterns and natural phenomena that govern their fishing and hunting activities. Traditional ecological knowledge passed down through generations included precise observations about ice formation, wildlife behavior, and weather patterns that allowed tribal communities to thrive in the harsh mountain environment. The lake typically begins freezing in December during severe winters, though complete ice coverage occurs only during exceptionally cold years when temperatures remain below zero for extended periods. Dr. Margaret Kellner, a limnologist from the University of Montana, first documented the unusual ice formation patterns during a winter research project in January 1978. Her team was studying thermal layering in large mountain lakes when they observed ice forming along the lake surface in perfectly straight lines that ran precisely north to south. The ice formations appeared as narrow bands roughly 6 inches wide, separated by areas of open water that remained unfrozen despite air temperatures well below the normal freezing point. Kellner's initial measurements confirmed that the ice lines aligned exactly with magnetic north, maintaining their orientation regardless of wind direction, shoreline configuration, or water depth variations. The phenomenon occurred only during partial freeze conditions, when air temperatures hovered near 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Complete ice coverage eliminated the linear patterns, and warm weather that prevented any ice formation showed no unusual characteristics. The straight-line formations required specific atmospheric conditions that occurred approximately once every 3 to 4 winters. Local photographer James Running Wolf, a member of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, documented the ice patterns extensively during the winter of 1979. His aerial photographs, taken from a small aircraft, revealed the geometric precision of the formations across the entire lake surface. The ice lines extended for miles without deviation, creating a grid pattern that resembled surveyor markings rather than natural ice formation. Running Wolf noted that his grandfather, who had lived at the lake for 86 years, claimed never to have seen such regular ice patterns during his lifetime. Tribal elder Mary Finley, interviewed by researchers from the Salish Kootenai College in 1981, provided detailed oral history about pre-contact observations of lake ice formation. According to her account, traditional knowledge described ice that formed in irregular patches following shoreline contours and wind patterns, creating the chaotic formations typical of large bodies of water. Finley stated that elders first noticed the straight-line patterns during the winter of 1955 to 1956, marking a distinct change in the lake's behavior that coincided with broader environmental changes in the region. Dr. Robert Chen, a glaciologist from the Cold Regions Research and Engineering Laboratory, conducted comprehensive studies of the Flathead Lake ice formations during the winters of 1982 through 1984. His analysis confirmed that the linear patterns violated established principles of ice physics, which predict that freezing should occur in response to thermal gradients, wind action, and water circulation patterns. Chen's measurements showed that water temperature, chemical composition, and mineral content remained consistent across areas that froze and areas that remained liquid, providing no explanation for the selective freezing patterns. Chen's electromagnetic surveys detected unusual magnetic field variations beneath the lake surface that corresponded exactly to the locations where ice lines formed. His equipment recorded magnetic anomalies that suggested the presence of metallic objects or mineral deposits aligned in perfect north-south orientation beneath the lakebed. However, sonar mapping and core sample analysis failed to locate any geological features that could account for the magnetic readings or influence ice formation patterns. The phenomenon attracted attention from the United States Geological Survey, which conducted bathymetric mapping and sediment analysis in 1985. USGS researchers confirmed the presence of magnetic anomalies, but found no evidence of metallic deposits, geological structures, or man-made objects that could explain the electromagnetic readings. Their final report acknowledged the ice formation patterns, but offered no theoretical framework for understanding the mechanism behind the phenomenon. Local residents who had observed the lake for decades provided additional context for the timing of the ice pattern changes. Fishing guide Tom Morrison, whose family had operated on Flathead Lake since the 1920s, recalled his father mentioning that ice formation became different sometime during the 1950s. Morrison's logbooks, maintained since 1947, showed no references to geometric ice patterns until 1956, after which the phenomenon appeared intermittently during appropriate weather conditions. The connection between the ice pattern changes and nuclear weapons testing emerged during research conducted by Dr. Sarah Martinez, a historical geographer from Montana State University, in 1988. Her investigation revealed that the first documented observations of the straight-line ice formations occurred during the winter following Operation Teapot, a series of 14 nuclear weapons tests conducted at the Nevada test site between February and May 1955. The timing correlation prompted speculation about potential connections between atmospheric nuclear testing and environmental changes in distant locations. Martinez's analysis of atmospheric circulation patterns showed that prevailing winds could carry radioactive particles from Nevada test sites across the northwestern United States, potentially depositing trace amounts of radioactive material in the Flathead Lake watershed. However, radiation monitoring conducted by state environmental agencies detected no elevated levels of radioactivity in lake water or sediments. The connection between nuclear testing and ice formation patterns remained purely temporal, with no identified causal mechanism. The Department of Energy expressed interest in the Flathead Lake research and provided funding for expanded studies during the late 1980s. However, access to the research data became restricted after 1990, and several scientists who had worked on the project were reassigned to classified programs. Dr. Chen's research notes from the original ice studies disappeared from university archives, and requests for information about the project were denied on grounds of national security. Modern satellite imagery has documented the continued occurrence of the geometric ice patterns during appropriate winter conditions. High-resolution photographs taken by commercial imaging satellites show the perfectly aligned ice formations with startling clarity, confirming that the phenomenon has persisted for more than 4 decades since its first documentation. The images reveal additional details about the formation's precision, including consistent spacing between ice lines and uniform width measurements that suggest artificial rather than natural origins. Climate change research at Flathead Lake has focused primarily on temperature trends and ecological impacts, with minimal attention paid to the unusual ice formation patterns. Current studies emphasize the lake's role as an indicator of regional climate change, documenting earlier ice-out dates and reduced winter ice coverage that threatens cold-water fish species. The geometric ice patterns receive no mention in contemporary climate research, despite their potential significance as indicators of environmental change. Tribal cultural preservation programs have documented traditional ecological knowledge about Flathead Lake, but discussions of the geometric ice patterns are typically excluded from public presentations. Elders continue to share observations about the phenomenon during private community meetings, but express concern about discussing changes in natural patterns with outside researchers. Some tribal members interpret the altered ice formation as evidence of broader disruptions to natural systems that began during the nuclear age. Today, Flathead Lake remains one of Montana's premier recreational destinations, attracting visitors who come to fish, boat, and enjoy the pristine mountain scenery. Winter visitors occasionally witness the formation of the mysterious ice lines, but most assume they are seeing normal, natural phenomena rather than patterns that defy conventional understanding of ice physics. The lake's surface continues to freeze according to its own geometric logic, creating temporary monuments to forces that operate beyond the boundaries of natural law. Each winter, when conditions align properly, the lake transforms into a vast compass, its surface etched with lines that point toward magnetic north with surveyor's precision. The ice remembers directions that water forgets, marking coordinates in a language written by processes that began in the Nevada desert and found their expression in the pristine waters of northwestern Montana, where traditional knowledge meets atomic secrets, and neither can fully explain what they observe together. Some roads lead through places where directions cease to exist. The Beartooth Highway stretches 68 miles across the Beartooth Plateau, connecting Red Lodge, Montana, with the northeast entrance to Yellowstone National Park. Completed in 1936, after 5 years of construction through some of the most challenging alpine terrain in North America, the highway climbs to an elevation of 10,947 feet at Beartooth Pass, making it one of the highest paved roads in the United States. The route crosses the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness, where granite peaks rise above 11,000 feet and permanent snowfields persist throughout the summer months. The highway follows a series of dramatic switchbacks, carved into cliff faces that drop thousands of feet into glacial valleys below. Summer construction seasons lasted only 4 months due to extreme weather conditions, and even today the road remains closed from mid-October through late May due to snow depths that can exceed 30 feet. The isolation of the route is profound, with no services or settlements between Red Lodge and the Wyoming border, and cell phone coverage remains spotty throughout most of the journey across the high plateau. Montana Department of Transportation Maintenance Supervisor Carl Hendricks first documented the navigation anomaly on July 12, 1998, during routine highway inspection runs. His department-issued GPS unit began displaying error messages at mile marker 47, showing impossible coordinates that placed his location several hundred miles away in North Dakota. When he attempted to use a backup compass to verify his position, the needle spun continuously without settling on any direction, making accurate navigation impossible. Hendricks initially suspected equipment failure and borrowed additional navigation devices from colleagues. All compasses exhibited the same erratic behavior within a specific zone that extended from mile marker 46.8 to mile marker 49.1, a distance of exactly 2.3 miles. The disruption affected both analog and digital compasses, handheld GPS units, and vehicle-mounted navigation systems. Outside this zone, all devices functioned normally with standard accuracy. The phenomenon created significant safety concerns for travelers on the remote highway, particularly during periods of reduced visibility when drivers relied on GPS navigation to maintain their position on the narrow mountain road. Hendricks documented 17 incidents during the 1998 season where vehicles became disoriented within the affected zone, including 2 cases where drivers stopped their cars in confusion after their navigation systems failed completely. Local search and rescue coordinator Susan Martinez confirmed that the navigation disruption had complicated several emergency response operations. Her team's GPS units would malfunction when entering the affected area, forcing rescue personnel to rely on visual landmarks and paper maps during critical situations. Martinez noted that the disruption seemed to affect radio communications as well, with handheld radios experiencing increased static and reduced range within the zone. Dr. Robert Chen, a geophysicist from Montana State University, conducted magnetic field surveys of the area in August 1999 to investigate potential geological causes for the navigation anomalies. His magnetometer readings showed no unusual magnetic field variations that could account for compass malfunctions. Bedrock composition analysis revealed typical granite formations with normal mineral content, providing no evidence of iron deposits or other magnetic materials that might interfere with navigation equipment. Chen's research team expanded their investigation to include electromagnetic field measurements and gravitational surveys. Their instruments detected slight variations in local gravitational fields that suggested possible subsurface density changes, but these anomalies were too minor to affect navigation equipment, according to established scientific understanding. The electromagnetic readings remained within normal ranges, offering no explanation for the widespread failure of electronic navigation systems. The United States Geological Survey conducted additional studies in 2001, deploying sophisticated magnetometers and ground-penetrating radar equipment to map subsurface conditions throughout the affected zone. Their analysis confirmed Chen's findings, revealing no geological features that could account for the navigation disruptions. Core samples taken from multiple locations showed consistent granite composition with no unusual mineral concentrations or structural anomalies. Federal Aviation Administration officials became concerned about the navigation anomaly after receiving reports from pilots whose aircraft instruments malfunctioned while flying over the Beartooth Pass area. Flight instructor Michael Torres reported that his plane's compass began spinning erratically at approximately 11,000 feet altitude, directly above mile marker 47. His GPS system displayed the same error messages experienced by ground-based vehicles, forcing him to navigate using visual flight rules until moving away from the area. The phenomenon attracted attention from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which dispatched a team of specialists to conduct precision measurements using atomic clocks and quantum magnetometers. Their equipment, designed to detect minute variations in electromagnetic fields and gravitational forces, recorded anomalous readings that defied conventional explanation. However, the team's final report was classified and removed from public access, with officials citing national security concerns related to navigation system vulnerabilities. Local residents who frequently traveled the Beartooth Highway began developing workarounds for the navigation disruption. Truck driver James Morrison, who made regular deliveries between Billings and Yellowstone, learned to identify visual landmarks within the affected zone to maintain his position on the highway. Morrison noted that the disruption appeared to be growing stronger over time, with his GPS unit taking longer to reacquire satellite signals after leaving the affected area. The Montana Highway Patrol issued internal advisories warning officers about the navigation anomaly and recommending increased caution when responding to incidents near mile marker 47. Patrol Supervisor Dorothy Walsh documented multiple cases where officers became disoriented due to equipment failures, including one incident where a patrol car drove several miles in the wrong direction before the officer realized his GPS system was providing incorrect information. Research interest in the Beartooth navigation anomaly declined after 2005, when funding for academic studies was discontinued without explanation. Chen's research group was reassigned to other projects, and requests for access to the USGS data were routinely denied. The Montana Department of Transportation began discouraging public discussion of the navigation problems, claiming that publicity might create unnecessary safety concerns for highway travelers. Modern smartphone navigation apps experience the same malfunctions as older GPS devices when used within the affected zone. Social media posts from travelers occasionally reference navigation problems on the Beartooth Highway, but most users attribute the issues to poor cell phone coverage or software glitches rather than environmental factors. Technology companies that have investigated customer complaints about GPS failures in the area have found no defects in their products or services. The Federal Communications Commission conducted radio frequency interference studies in 2012 to investigate potential causes for the communication problems reported in the Beartooth Pass area. Their measurements detected no unauthorized transmissions or interference sources that could disrupt GPS signals or radio communications. The Commission's final report acknowledged the navigation anomalies but offered no technical explanations for the observed effects. Current highway maintenance procedures require workers to carry paper maps and rely on visual navigation when operating within the affected zone. New employees receive briefings about the navigation anomaly and are trained to recognize the mile markers that define the boundaries of the disrupted area. Official maintenance logs document equipment malfunctions but avoid speculation about the underlying causes of the navigation problems. The Beartooth Highway continues to attract thousands of visitors each summer who come to experience one of America's most scenic mountain drives. Most travelers pass through the affected zone without realizing that their navigation equipment has temporarily ceased functioning, trusting the visual clarity of the mountain landscape to guide them along the well-marked route. Those who do notice the compass disruptions typically assume they are experiencing normal interference from the surrounding granite peaks. Today, mile marker 47 stands as an unremarkable roadside postmarking distance along one of the nation's most spectacular highways. Drivers pass the marker while their compasses spin in circles and their GPS displays show impossible locations, navigating by sight through a landscape where mountains provide the only reliable reference points. The granite peaks that witnessed the road's construction in the 1930s continue their silent watch over a stretch of pavement where technology fails and direction becomes a matter of faith in the evidence of human eyes, rather than the certainty of electronic instruments. Some roads lead through places where directions cease to exist. The Beartooth Highway stretches 68 miles across the Beartooth Plateau, connecting Red Lodge, Montana, with the northeast entrance to Yellowstone National Park. Completed in 1936, after 5 years of construction through some of the most challenging alpine terrain in North America, the highway climbs to an elevation of 10,947 feet at Beartooth Pass, making it one of the highest paved roads in the United States. The route crosses the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness, where granite peaks rise above 11,000 feet and permanent snowfields persist throughout the summer months. The highway follows a series of dramatic switchbacks, carved into cliff faces that drop thousands of feet into glacial valleys below. Summer construction seasons lasted only 4 months due to extreme weather conditions, and even today the road remains closed from mid-October through late May due to snow depths that can exceed 30 feet. The isolation of the route is profound, with no services or settlements between Red Lodge and the Wyoming border, and cell phone coverage remains spotty throughout most of the journey across the high plateau. Montana Department of Transportation Maintenance Supervisor Carl Hendricks first documented the navigation anomaly on July 12, 1998, during routine highway inspection runs. His department-issued GPS unit began displaying error messages at mile marker 47, showing impossible coordinates that placed his location several hundred miles away in North Dakota. When he attempted to use a backup compass to verify his position, the needle spun continuously without settling on any direction, making accurate navigation impossible. Hendricks initially suspected equipment failure and borrowed additional navigation devices from colleagues. All compasses exhibited the same erratic behavior within a specific zone that extended from mile marker 46.8 to mile marker 49.1, a distance of exactly 2.3 miles. The disruption affected both analog and digital compasses, handheld GPS units, and vehicle-mounted navigation systems. Outside this zone, all devices functioned normally with standard accuracy. The phenomenon created significant safety concerns for travelers on the remote highway, particularly during periods of reduced visibility when drivers relied on GPS navigation to maintain their position on the narrow mountain road. Hendricks documented 17 incidents during the 1998 season where vehicles became disoriented within the affected zone, including 2 cases where drivers stopped their cars in confusion after their navigation systems failed completely. Local search and rescue coordinator Susan Martinez confirmed that the navigation disruption had complicated several emergency response operations. Her team's GPS units would malfunction when entering the affected area, forcing rescue personnel to rely on visual landmarks and paper maps during critical situations. Martinez noted that the disruption seemed to affect radio communications as well, with handheld radios experiencing increased static and reduced range within the zone. Dr. Robert Chen, a geophysicist from Montana State University, conducted magnetic field surveys of the area in August 1999 to investigate potential geological causes for the navigation anomalies. His magnetometer readings showed no unusual magnetic field variations that could account for compass malfunctions. Bedrock composition analysis revealed typical granite formations with normal mineral content, providing no evidence of iron deposits or other magnetic materials that might interfere with navigation equipment. Chen's research team expanded their investigation to include electromagnetic field measurements and gravitational surveys. Their instruments detected slight variations in local gravitational fields that suggested possible subsurface density changes, but these anomalies were too minor to affect navigation equipment according to established scientific understanding. The electromagnetic readings remained within normal ranges, offering no explanation for the widespread failure of electronic navigation systems. The United States Geological Survey conducted additional studies in 2001, deploying sophisticated magnetometers and ground-penetrating radar equipment to map subsurface conditions throughout the affected zone. Their analysis confirmed Chen's findings, revealing no geological features that could account for the navigation disruptions. Core samples taken from multiple locations showed consistent granite composition with no unusual mineral concentrations or structural anomalies. Federal Aviation Administration officials became concerned about the navigation anomaly after receiving reports from pilots whose aircraft instruments malfunctioned while flying over the Beartooth Pass area. Flight instructor Michael Torres reported that his plane's compass began spinning erratically at approximately 11,000 feet altitude, directly above mile marker 47. His GPS system displayed the same error messages experienced by ground-based vehicles, forcing him to navigate using visual flight rules until moving away from the area. The phenomenon attracted attention from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which dispatched a team of specialists to conduct precision measurements using atomic clocks and quantum magnetometers. Their equipment, designed to detect minute variations in electromagnetic fields and gravitational forces, recorded anomalous readings that defied conventional explanation. However, the team's final report was classified and removed from public access, with officials citing national security concerns related to navigation system vulnerabilities. Local residents who frequently traveled the Beartooth Highway began developing workarounds for the navigation disruption. Truck driver James Morrison, who made regular deliveries between Billings and Yellowstone, learned to identify visual landmarks within the affected zone to maintain his position on the highway. Morrison noted that the disruption appeared to be growing stronger over time, with his GPS unit taking longer to reacquire satellite signals after leaving the affected area. The Montana Highway Patrol issued internal advisories warning officers about the navigation anomaly and recommending increased caution when responding to incidents near mile marker 47. Patrol Supervisor Dorothy Walsh documented multiple cases where officers became disoriented due to equipment failures, including one incident where a patrol car drove several miles in the wrong direction before the officer realized his GPS system was providing incorrect information. Research interest in the Beartooth navigation anomaly declined after 2005, when funding for academic studies was discontinued without explanation. Chen's research group was reassigned to other projects, and requests for access to the USGS data were routinely denied. The Montana Department of Transportation began discouraging public discussion of the navigation problems, claiming that publicity might create unnecessary safety concerns for highway travelers. Modern smartphone navigation apps experience the same malfunctions as older GPS devices when used within the affected zone. Social media posts from travelers occasionally reference navigation problems on the Beartooth Highway, but most users attribute the issues to poor cell phone coverage or software glitches rather than environmental factors. technology companies that have investigated customer complaints about GPS failures in the area have found no defects in their products or services. The Federal Communications Commission conducted radio frequency interference studies in 2012 to investigate potential causes for the communication problems reported in the Beartooth Pass area. Their measurements detected no unauthorized transmissions or interference sources that could disrupt GPS signals or radio communications. The Commission's final report acknowledged the navigation anomalies but offered no technical explanations for the observed effects. Current highway maintenance procedures require workers to carry paper maps and rely on visual navigation when operating within the affected zone. New employees receive briefings about the navigation anomaly and are trained to recognize the mile markers that define the boundaries of the disrupted area. Official maintenance logs document equipment malfunctions but avoid speculation about the underlying causes of the navigation problems. The Beartooth Highway continues to attract thousands of visitors each summer who come to experience one of America's most scenic mountain drives. Most travelers pass through the affected zone without realizing that their navigation equipment has temporarily ceased functioning, trusting the visual clarity of the mountain landscape to guide them along the well-marked route. Those who do notice the compass disruptions typically assume they are experiencing normal interference from the surrounding granite peaks. Today, mile marker 47 stands as an unremarkable roadside postmarking distance along one of the nation's most spectacular highways. Drivers pass the marker while their compasses spin in circles and their GPS displays show impossible locations, navigating by sight through a landscape where mountains provide the only reliable reference points. The granite peaks that witnessed the road's construction in the 1930s continue their silent watch over a stretch of pavement where technology fails and direction becomes a matter of faith in the evidence of human eyes, rather than the certainty of electronic instruments. Some disasters create order that nature never intended. Earthquake Lake sits in the Madison River Valley of southwestern Montana, 18 miles northwest of West Yellowstone, where the Hebgen Lake earthquake of August 17, 1959, triggered one of the largest landslides in North American history. The magnitude 7.3 earthquake caused 80 million tons of rock, soil, and timber to cascade down the north face of the Madison Range at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour, burying a Forest Service campground and damming the Madison River to create a new body of water. 28 people died in the disaster, and the resulting lake covers 3,000 acres that were previously dry land. The landslide created a natural dam 260 feet high and a half-mile wide, blocking the Madison River and forming what engineers initially expected would be an irregularly shaped lake with highly variable depths reflecting the chaotic nature of the debris that formed its bottom. The slide zone included massive granite boulders, fractured limestone, fallen timber, camping equipment, and soil from multiple geological formations, creating what should have been an extremely uneven lake bed with deep pockets, shallow areas, and significant topographical variation. Dr. Margaret Kellner, a hydrologist from the United States Geological Survey, conducted the first comprehensive bathymetric survey of Earthquake Lake in June 1961 to assess the stability of the landslide dam and map underwater hazards for potential recreational use. Her sonar equipment revealed an immediately puzzling characteristic. The lake maintained a uniform depth of exactly 190 feet across its entire 3,000-acre surface, with depth variations of less than 6 inches throughout the water body. Kellner's initial assumption was that her sonar equipment was malfunctioning, given that landslide-formed lakes typically exhibit extremely irregular bottom topography. She borrowed additional surveying equipment from the Army Corps of Engineers and repeated her measurements using multiple sonar systems operated by different technicians. All equipment produced identical results, confirming that Earthquake Lake possessed a perfectly flat bottom despite having formed from the chaotic debris of a massive landslide. The uniformity of the lake's depth defied basic principles of landslide geology. When millions of tons of mixed debris fall into a valley, the resulting surface should reflect the random distribution of materials, creating a highly irregular topography with deep holes where large boulders settled and shallow areas where lighter materials accumulated. The notion that such debris could spontaneously organize itself into a perfectly level surface contradicted established scientific understanding of gravitational settling processes. Forest Service Ranger Michael Torres, who had worked in the Madison Valley since 1956 and witnessed the earthquake firsthand, provided additional context about the immediate aftermath of the landslide. His incident reports from August 1959 described massive boulders the size of houses mixed with tons of smaller debris, creating what appeared to be an extremely chaotic pile of material blocking the river. Torres expressed confusion about how such disorder could have resulted in the perfectly uniform lake bed that emerged once the water stabilized. Dr. Robert Chen, a sedimentologist from Montana State University, joined Kellner's research team in 1962 to investigate the mechanisms that might have created the uniform lake bottom. His core sampling efforts revealed that the debris beneath the lake maintained its expected chaotic composition, with granite boulders, limestone fragments, organic material, and soil distributed randomly throughout the sediment layers. However, the upper surface of this debris formed a perfectly horizontal plane that showed no correlation with the underlying material distribution. Chen's analysis suggested that some unknown process had acted upon the debris after the landslide to create the uniform surface. His core samples showed evidence of material movement within the debris pile, with finer sediments appearing to have flowed into gaps between larger rocks in patterns that suggested hydraulic sorting. However, the precision of the leveling exceeded what could be explained by normal settling processes or underwater erosion. Local residents who lived in the Madison Valley before the earthquake provided accounts that added to the mystery surrounding the lake's formation. Ranch hand Tom Morrison, whose family had owned property near the slide zone since the 1920s, recalled that the Madison River had carved a deep, narrow channel through the area before the earthquake. The original riverbed should have created significant depth variations in any lake formed by blocking the valley. Yet sonar surveys showed no trace of the original channel beneath the uniform lake bottom. The Army Corps of Engineers conducted extensive stability assessments of the landslide dam throughout the 1960s, including detailed underwater surveys designed to identify potential failure points or areas of concern. Their classified reports, partially released through Freedom of Information Act requests decades later, acknowledged the unusual uniformity of the lake's depth, but offered no explanation for the phenomenon. Engineers noted that the perfect leveling actually enhanced dam stability by distributing water pressure evenly across the debris structure. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a geophysicist from the University of Montana, attempted to map the subsurface structure of the landslide using ground-penetrating radar in 1973. Her equipment detected the expected chaotic arrangement of debris materials beneath the lake, but consistently showed a perfectly flat interface between the debris and the water column. Martinez's attempts to locate the original Madison River channel using subsurface imaging techniques were unsuccessful, as if the channel had been completely obliterated during the leveling process. The phenomenon attracted attention from international researchers studying landslide-dammed lakes in other regions. Dr. James Crawford, a specialist in natural disaster geology from the University of British Columbia, visited Earthquake Lake in 1975 to compare its characteristics with similar formations in the Canadian Rockies. His analysis confirmed that Earthquake Lake's uniform depth was unprecedented among landslide-formed water bodies, noting that comparable lakes in British Columbia showed the expected irregular bottom topography. Underwater photography expeditions conducted during the 1980s revealed additional anomalies beneath the lake's surface. The bottom appeared to consist of fine sediment rather than the large boulders and debris that should have been visible based on the original landslide composition. Divers reported that the lakebed felt unusually firm and level, as if the debris had been compressed and smoothed by enormous pressure. Attempts to penetrate the bottom surface with probes consistently encountered resistance at exactly 190 feet, regardless of location. The Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks began managing Earthquake Lake as a recreational fishery in the 1980s. requiring additional bathymetric surveys to ensure safe boating conditions. Their updated measurements confirmed that the lake's uniform depth had remained constant for more than 20 years since its formation. Fish population studies revealed unusual distribution patterns, with species congregating in specific areas despite the uniform habitat conditions throughout the lake. Modern GPS and digital sonar technology has provided increasingly precise measurements of the lake's characteristics, confirming that the depth uniformity extends to sub-inch precision across the entire water body. Satellite imagery analysis shows no evidence of the geological processes that typically modify landslide-formed lakes over time, such as sediment accumulation, shoreline erosion, or channel formation. The lake appears to have achieved a stable configuration that resists normal environmental changes. Current geological surveys continue to classify Earthquake Lake as an anomalous formation that challenges conventional understanding of landslide processes. Academic papers discussing the lake typically focus on its formation during the 1959 earthquake, while avoiding detailed discussion of the uniform depth phenomena. Requests for research access to conduct advanced subsurface studies are routinely denied by land management agencies, citing safety concerns and environmental protection requirements. Earthquake Lake remains a popular destination for fishing, boating, and camping, attracting visitors who come to experience the dramatic landscape created by one of Montana's most significant natural disasters. Interpretive signs describe the earthquake and landslide that formed the lake, emphasizing the human tragedy and geological significance of the event. The signs make no mention of the unusual depth characteristics that distinguish Earthquake Lake from every other landslide-formed water body documented by science. Today, the lake's surface reflects the mountains and sky with the same clarity as any natural body of water, revealing nothing about the mysteries that lie beneath its uniform depths. Sonar operators still record the same impossible measurements that first puzzled researchers 60 years ago, documenting a bottom that remains as flat and precise as if it had been graded by enormous machines rather than created by the random violence of falling mountains. The Madison River continues to flow through the lake toward its eventual confluence with the Missouri, carrying no memory of the channel it once carved through ground that now lies buried beneath 190 feet of water that refuses to acknowledge the chaos from which it emerged. Some shadows remember structures that no longer cast them. Bannack State Park preserves the remnants of Montana's first territorial capital, a gold rush boomtown established in 1862 when prospector John White discovered placer deposits along Grasshopper Creek. The settlement grew rapidly to house over 3,000 residents by 1864, complete with hotels, saloons, a Masonic lodge, and territorial government buildings. The gold played out by the 1870s, and Bannack's population dwindled as miners moved to richer strikes elsewhere. By 1950, only a handful of buildings remained occupied, and the last resident left in 1970, allowing the state to preserve the site as a ghost town representing frontier Montana. Today, 60 structures remain standing in various states of preservation, scattered along what was once Main Street and the residential areas that housed miners and their families. The town sits in a high mountain valley at 5,600 feet elevation, surrounded by the Beaverhead Mountains and accessible by a gravel road that discourages casual visitors. Summers are brief but intense, with long daylight hours that extend well past 9 p.m. during peak season. The dry climate and stable foundation conditions have preserved many buildings in remarkable condition, making Bannack one of the most complete ghost towns in the American West. Park maintenance supervisor Robert Chen first noticed the shadow anomaly during routine building inspections on Tuesday, June 14, 1988. While photographing structural conditions of the Mead Hotel, he observed that shadows cast by the three-story building pointed northeast toward an empty lot, despite the afternoon sun's position in the southwest sky. When Chen checked his compass and sun position, the shadows should have fallen toward the southeast, yet they consistently pointed in the opposite direction. Chen documented the phenomenon with additional photographs and discovered that every standing structure in Bannack cast shadows in impossible directions during his Tuesday inspection. The Hotel Meade's shadow pointed toward the site where the Wells Fargo building had stood until its demolition in 1943. The Graves Hotel cast its shadow toward the location of the original territorial courthouse, torn down in 1912. Each misaligned shadow seemed to acknowledge buildings that no longer existed, rather than responding to the actual position of the sun. The anomaly occurred only on Tuesdays and affected every structure simultaneously throughout the town. Chen began documenting the phenomenon systematically, taking photographs from identical positions each Tuesday to track the consistency of the shadow directions. His records showed that the shadows pointed toward specific demolished buildings with mathematical precision, as if the missing structures still influenced light patterns decades after their removal. Dr. Margaret Steele, a historian from Montana State University, researched the locations indicated by the anomalous shadows and confirmed that they corresponded exactly to buildings that had been demolished or destroyed over the past century. Her analysis of historical maps and photographs revealed that the shadows pointed toward structures that had played significant roles in Bannack's development, including the original Wells Fargo office, the first schoolhouse, the Methodist Church, and several large mercantile establishments. Local photographer James Running Wolf documented the shadow phenomenon extensively during the summer of 1989, taking hundreds of photographs on consecutive Tuesdays to capture the consistent patterns. His images showed the same impossible shadow directions week after week, with shadows maintaining their northeastern orientation regardless of cloud cover, time of day, or seasonal sun angle changes. Running Wolf noted that the shadows appeared normal when viewed directly, but showed their anomalous directions only when captured on film. The most disturbing aspect of the phenomenon emerged when visitors began reporting that their photographs of Bannack showed normal shadow patterns when developed immediately, but revealed the misaligned shadows when the same film was developed 48 hours or more after exposure. Tourist Linda Martinez discovered this temporal element when she had vacation photos developed at two different labs several days apart. The immediate processing showed expected shadow patterns, while delayed development of identical frames revealed shadows pointing toward empty lots and non-existent buildings. Dr. Patricia Chen, a photographic specialist from the Rochester Institute of Technology, investigated the delayed development phenomenon in July 1991. Her controlled experiments confirmed that photographic emulsion continued to change after exposure when film was taken at Bannack on Tuesdays. Chemical analysis of affected film showed ongoing photochemical reactions that gradually altered shadow patterns over a period of 2 to 3 days, ultimately revealing the anomalous shadow directions that weren't visible during immediate development. The temporal aspect of the photographic anomaly defied conventional understanding of film chemistry. Photographic emulsion typically stabilizes within hours of exposure, with no mechanism for continued image alteration during storage. Chen's analysis suggested that something at Bannack was causing extended photochemical activity specifically related to shadow imagery, though she could identify no environmental factors that might trigger such reactions. Montana State Parks Administration began receiving reports from visitors who discovered the anomalous shadows in their vacation photographs weeks after returning home. Many tourists contacted the park to report what they assumed were development errors, unaware that they had documented a phenomenon that occurred with absolute regularity every Tuesday. Park staff were instructed to dismiss such reports as processing problems rather than acknowledging the shadow anomaly. The phenomenon attracted attention from the Society for Psychical Research, which conducted investigations during the summer of 1992 using specialized photographic equipment and electromagnetic field detectors. Their preliminary findings confirmed the shadow anomalies, but detected no unusual electromagnetic activity that might explain the photographic effects. The Society's final report was never published, and team members declined subsequent interview requests about their Bannack research. Digital photography technology became available during the late 1990s, providing new opportunities to study the shadow phenomenon without the complications of film chemistry. However, digital cameras captured only normal shadow patterns at Bannack, even on Tuesdays when film cameras documented the anomalous directions. The shadow anomaly appeared to affect only traditional photographic emulsion, suggesting a specific interaction between the phenomenon and silver halide chemistry. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a physicist from the University of Montana, attempted to study the shadow anomaly using time-lapse photography and light measurement equipment in 2003. Her instruments showed normal light patterns consistent with the sun's actual position, while simultaneously exposed film revealed the impossible shadow directions. Martinez's research suggested that the phenomenon affected photographic recording rather than actual light behavior, though she could propose no mechanism for such selective influence. Access to Bannack became increasingly restricted during the 2000s, as state park administrations cited concerns about visitor safety and historic preservation. Photography permits became required for professional or research purposes, and amateur investigators found their access limited to standard guided tours that avoided discussion of unusual phenomena. Park literature focused exclusively on gold rush history and frontier life, making no reference to anomalous shadow patterns or photographic irregularities. Modern smartphone cameras and digital photography equipment show no signs of the shadow anomaly that continues to affect traditional film. Visitors who bring film cameras to Bannack occasionally report discovering the misaligned shadows in their photographs weeks later, though such reports are typically dismissed as development errors or equipment malfunctions. The phenomenon has become increasingly rare as film photography has largely been replaced by digital technology. Current park management maintains that reports of unusual shadow patterns result from visitor confusion about sun positions and normal photographic artifacts. Staff training includes instructions to redirect questions about shadow anomalies towards standard interpretive topics about mining history and frontier architecture. The park's official position is that Bannack's shadows follow normal patterns consistent with solar geometry and seasonal variations. Today, visitors to Bannack can walk the dusty streets where prospectors once searched for fortune, exploring preserved buildings that stand as monuments to the brief prosperity of Montana's first gold rush. On Tuesday afternoons, shadows fall across the boardwalks and empty lots according to laws that cameras remember differently than eyes observe, pointing toward foundations that mark where dreams once stood and casting darkness toward coordinates that exist only in the memory of light itself. The abandoned schoolhouse still catches the afternoon sun, its shadow reaching across Main Street toward a space where children once learned their lessons in a building that time has claimed but light refuses to forget. In that persistent darkness lies evidence of how some places hold on to their past so tightly that even shadows refuse to acknowledge the present, measuring their direction not by the sun that shines today, but by the structures that defined meaning when Bannack's streets bustled with the sounds of a world that exists now only in the orientation of impossible shade. Some places are counted by numbers that refuse to change. Ismay sits in the extreme southeastern corner of Montana, 27 miles from the North Dakota border and 11 miles south of the Yellowstone River. The town was established in 1908 as a railroad stop on the Milwaukee Road's transcontinental line, named after Ismay Eccles, the daughter of a railroad executive. At its peak in the 1920s, Ismay housed approximately 150 residents who worked for the railroad or farmed the surrounding wheat and cattle country. The Great Depression and the decline of rail transportation reduced the population steadily, leaving Ismay as one of Montana's smallest incorporated communities. The town today consists of a grain elevator, a post office, a few scattered houses, and the remnants of what was once a more substantial community. State Highway 200 connects Ismay to larger towns in the region, but the nearest significant population center is Miles City, 68 miles to the northwest. The surrounding landscape is typical of the northern Great Plains, rolling grassland broken by occasional coulees and creek beds, with vast fields of wheat and barley extending to horizons marked only by distant buttes. Winters are harsh, with temperatures frequently dropping below zero and wind that can reach 70 miles per hour across the open prairie. Postal Clerk Dorothy Martinez first noticed the census anomaly in 1987 while researching population data for a federal grant application. Martinez had lived in Ismay since 1963 and had personally witnessed the births, deaths, marriages, and relocations that should have changed the town's official population count over the decades. However, every federal census document and government database she consulted showed Ismay's population as exactly 26 residents, a figure that had remained constant since the 1930 census, despite obvious demographic changes. Martinez's investigation revealed that the 26 figure appeared in the 1930, 1940, 1950, 1960, 1970, and 1980 censuses, as well as in annual population estimates issued by the Bureau of the Census. The consistency was particularly puzzling because Martinez could document specific individuals who had been born in Ismay, died, or moved away during this period, changes that should have been reflected in official population counts. She began maintaining her own informal census, conducting door-to-door counts that showed the actual population fluctuating between 18 and 34 residents depending on seasonal farm workers and family situations. The discrepancy between observed population changes and official records became more apparent during the 1990s when Martinez documented several significant demographic events that had no impact on federal population figures. In 1992, longtime resident Carl Johnson died at age 87, and the Peterson family moved to Billings, reducing the actual population by 4 people. In 1994, 3 children were born to local families, and a retired couple relocated from Miles City to take over the grain elevator operation. Despite these documented changes, all federal databases continue to list Ismay's population as 26. Local rancher Tom Bradley, whose family had lived near Ismay since 1914, confirmed Martinez's observations about the static population figure. Bradley recalled his grandfather mentioning that census takers in the 1930s had difficulty getting accurate counts because many residents worked seasonal jobs that took them away from town for months at a time. According to family stories, the 1930 census had been conducted during a period when exactly 26 people were present in Ismay, but this snapshot had somehow become fixed in government records regardless of subsequent changes. County Clerk Susan Morrison, who administered local elections and maintained voter registration records for the Ismay area, provided additional documentation of the population anomaly. Her voter rolls showed the normal fluctuations expected in a small rural community, with new registrations, deaths, and address changes occurring regularly. However, when she submitted annual reports to state agencies, the population data was automatically adjusted to match the federal figure of 26, even when her actual counts differed significantly. The phenomenon attracted attention from Dr. James Crawford, a demographer from Montana State University, who visited Ismay in 1996 to investigate the static population reports. Crawford conducted a comprehensive census of the community and found 31 residents, including children, adults, and elderly individuals whose presence could be verified through multiple sources. When he submitted his findings to the Bureau of the Census for correction, his report was acknowledged, but the official population figure remained unchanged in subsequent government publications. Crawford's research revealed that similar anomalies existed in federal records for several other small Montana communities, though none showed the absolute consistency found in Ismay's case. His analysis suggested that bureaucratic processes designed to smooth out statistical variations in small-town population counts had somehow created a feedback loop that prevented Ismay's official figures from updating. However, his attempts to trace the specific mechanism responsible for the frozen data were unsuccessful, as multiple agencies claimed the population figures originated from other sources. The Bureau of the Census responded to inquiries about Ismay's population data by stating that small communities often showed statistical irregularities due to the challenges of accurate enumeration in rural areas. Agency representatives suggested that the consistency of the 26 figure indicated reliable methodology rather than bureaucratic error. When pressed for details about the enumeration procedures used in ISME, Bureau officials cited confidentiality policies that prevented disclosure of specific census techniques and data sources. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a sociologist from the University of Montana, attempted a longitudinal study of ISME's population dynamics in 2002, hoping to understand how federal agencies maintain such consistent counts despite obvious demographic changes. Her research was hampered by restrictions on access to detailed census data and by the discovery that multiple federal agencies referenced each other's population figures in circular fashion, making it impossible to identify the original source of the 26 count. The persistence of the anomalous population figure became particularly evident during the 2010 census, when Martinez personally assisted census takers in conducting a complete enumeration of ISME residents. The field count identified 19 people living in the community, but the final published census results listed the population as 26. When Martinez contacted the regional census office for clarification, she was informed that statistical adjustment procedures had been applied to ensure consistency with historical data trends. Modern digital databases and automated reporting systems have perpetuated the static population figure across multiple government agencies and commercial data services. Internet searches for ISME consistently return the 26 population count, and this figure appears in state government publications, academic research, and commercial databases that reference federal demographic data. The number has achieved a kind of bureaucratic immortality that resists correction regardless of actual demographic conditions. Attempts to update ISME's population figures through official channels have been unsuccessful, with requests for corrections resulting in form letters acknowledging the inquiry but providing no substantive response. Local officials have learned to work around the anomaly by maintaining separate population counts for practical purposes, while accepting that federal records will continue to show 26 residents regardless of actual circumstances. The Montana Department of Commerce uses the federal population figure for ISME when calculating state aid distributions and regulatory requirements, creating administrative complications for a community whose actual size may differ significantly from its official count. Local services and infrastructure planning must account for the real population, while navigating bureaucratic systems designed around the fixed federal number. Today, ISME continues to function as a small rural community where residents know each other personally and can easily account for every individual living within the town boundaries. The post office serves whoever happens to live there. The grain elevator operates according to actual agricultural activity, and local elections reflect the participation of real people rather than statistical abstractions. Yet somewhere in the vast database systems that track American demographics, ISME exists as a place where exactly 26 people have lived for nearly a century, counted and recounted by algorithms that measure a reality independent of the one experienced by actual residents. The numbers persist in spreadsheets and reports that circulate through government offices, academic institutions, and corporate databases, documenting a version of ISME that exists parallel to the physical community. In that bureaucratic dimension, 26 people have occupied the same coordinates for decades, neither aging nor changing, frozen in a census that was taken once and somehow became permanent, measuring a town that exists only in the mathematics of administrative systems that have forgotten how to count beyond the boundaries of their own endless, reliable precision.